June 24, 1947. A civilian pilot scanning Mount Rainier for wreckage locks eyes on 9 metallic discs slicing through the sky at impossible speeds. Kenneth Arnold's report births the term flying saucer and triggers a 22-year military investigation that would log over 12,000 cases. Project Blue Book promised answers. It delivered silence. But here's what they didn't tell you. Arnold wasn't alone. Across Europe's meticulously monitored airspace, where every aircraft, every altitude, every transponder signal is tracked, objects appeared that shouldn't exist. No sound, no explanation. Just patterns in the data they hoped you'd never notice. Tonight we're opening those files. 3 hours, dozens of cases. One question that will haunt you. What if the sky was never empty? For numerous decades, Europe's airways have been presumed unremarkable when contrasted with regions like the American Southwest or distant ocean expanses. The collective imagination often assigns strange phenomena to deserts, military trials, or isolated wilderness. In stark contrast, Europe feels settled, scrutinized, and understood. However, this assumption has gradually begun to wane. Throughout the continent, an accumulation of reports has surfaced, frequently overlooked, sometimes dismissed, and occasionally forgotten, detailing happenings that defy the behavior of standard aircraft. Lights that hovered without sound, formations that maneuvered contrary to prevailing winds, objects that appeared abruptly and disappeared just as unceremoniously. Most of these accounts never captured the headlines. They found their way into local police records, air traffic documentation, or personal diaries. Some were shared only with neighbors, colleagues, or family members who listened with polite interest and then redirected the conversation. Others were submitted to modest civilian organizations that meticulously logged sightings without fanfare. Individually, each narrative might be rationalized. However, collated, they imply something altogether different. The skies over Europe might not be as tranquil as they initially appear. In the aftermath of World War II, European administrations were engrossed in reconstructing cities and fortifying borders. Airspace transformed into a strategic commodity. Radar systems were deployed across the continent, first to monitor hostile bombers, later to manage civilian flights. By the time the Cold War settled into its prolonged tense standoff, Europe had evolved into one of the world's most closely monitored territories. This development ought to have eradicated surprises. Instead, it wrought an illusion of certainty, as when something emerged that defied immediate identification, the instinct was to avoid public inquiry and instead downplay attention. Both military and civil officials recognized that inexplicable reports could incite panic, speculation, or unwarranted scrutiny. Thus, many occurrences were quietly archived. Some were ultimately rationalized: environmental phenomena, celestial objects, misidentified aircraft, while in numerous instances, ambiguity persisted with no definitive conclusions reached. Files simply concluded with neutral language: unidentified, unknown, no further action taken. These phrases manifest with remarkable frequency across France, Germany, Belgium, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands. Distinct patterns arose. A cluster of sightings would materialize. Witnesses would recount unusual activities. Investigations would initiate, only to come to a halt. No public resolutions, no enduring media spotlight, merely silence. The Netherlands holds a distinctive place within this unassuming schema. Compact in land area, densely populated and technologically adept, it occupies a pivotal juncture of European air traffic. Major commercial routes traverse overhead with regularity. Military operations involving NATO forces frequently occur in or adjacent to Dutch airspace. Offshore facilities pepper the North Sea, contributing additional layers of aerial and nautical intricacy. Theoretically, this should facilitate the identification and explanation of unidentified flying objects. In reality, it appears to serve the contrary. When something atypical graces the skies over Amsterdam, it does so against a backdrop of perpetual activity. Lights dart everywhere. Aircraft climb and descend. Reflections flutter across water, glass, and clouds. The very environment morphs into a veil. Nevertheless, time and again, witnesses assert that what they observed defied the characteristics of the familiar. They recount instances of stillness in a sky characterized by motion, objects that deviated from established flight paths, lights that did not pulse, bank, or dissipate like the markers of conventional aircraft are trained to perform. Most remarkably, they reflect upon the silence, not merely the muted buzz of engines softened by altitude, but a profound absence of noise entirely. For a continent accustomed to order, this silence is deeply disquieting. It is one factor contributing to the subdued nature of European UAP reports. A cultural inclination towards restraint, rationalism, and an aversion to drawing unnecessary attention persists. Yet beneath that restraint, an ember of curiosity remains. In recent times, this curiosity has begun to resonate more loudly. Part of this shift can be traced to developments beyond European borders. As the United States government commenced its public acknowledgement of unidentified aerial phenomena, it reshaped the global dialogue. Suddenly, the discourse surrounding unidentified aerial phenomena transcended the realm of fringe conversations or late-night radio shows. It found its way into committee hearings, scientific symposiums, and official documentation. European scholars took heed. Civilian organizations scattered across the continent began to dissect historical cases anew, while journalists quietly sifted through archives. Retired airline pilots and radar operators, emboldened by this new climate, frequently started their narratives with a hesitant admission. They had never shared such experiences before. The Netherlands, in particular, emerged as a noteworthy focal point, not due to an abundance of extreme sightings, but due to a plethora of fleeting encounters, momentary observations, and instances observed by multiple individuals who never crossed paths. These events, often lasting mere seconds or minutes, left behind a trail of inquiries, but little in the way of concrete proof. Amsterdam exemplifies this phenomenon, not as a hub of incessant activity, but as a city where anomalies appear with just enough regularity to evade outright dismissal. The city's geography plays a pivotal role. It is encircled by water, interlaced with canals, and remains open to the expansive North Sea. The atmosphere above Amsterdam exhibits a quality that renders light both reflective and elusive. Here, light operates in unexpected ways. Clouds can carry a glow further than anticipated. Reflections can bounce and distort. Nevertheless, seasoned observers, pilots, law enforcement officers, air traffic controllers, have recounted moments when their instincts signaled an anomaly, instances when their training and experience faltered. Though these occurrences are infrequent, they linger in memory. As we delve deeper into this examination, we shall closely scrutinize specific incidents. Some will be striking, others subdued, some officially acknowledged, while others will remain the province of those who personally experienced them. We shall refrain from hastily drawing conclusions. Instead, we will advance slowly and cautiously, allowing patterns to unfold organically. For whatever these phenomena may signify, whether misidentified technology, atmospheric phenomena, or something more elusive, they call into question the comforting belief that everything above us is thoroughly understood, that nothing unexpected traverses the skies of Europe. The narrative of Amsterdam suggests otherwise, and as the city succumbs to slumber each night, cloaked beneath layers of cloud and reflected illumination, the sky continues its quiet endeavors, occasionally unveiling just enough to remind us of the many mysteries yet to be unraveled. The Netherlands as an overlooked UAP corridor. When individuals envision unidentified aerial phenomena, the Netherlands is rarely the first location that springs to mind. The country appears too compact, too flat, and too exhaustively explored. Its borders are sharply defined, its infrastructure robust. Daily, its skies are traversed by thousands of commercial flights, each meticulously logged, tracked, and archived. The notion of the unknown seems to have no place here. Yet, this very assumption may be why the Netherlands has remained unnoticed. Strategically, the nation occupies a discrete crossroad. To the west lies the North Sea, a vast body of water saturated with shipping channels, offshore facilities, and submerged infrastructure. Eastward and southward extend the core territories of Europe, Germany, Belgium, France, each boasting their own military airspaces and aviation routes. Above all this, the airspace is intricately layered, stratified, and indefinitely active. This continuous activity creates an effective camouflage. In less congested areas, an unusual object draws immediate attention. In settings such as the American desert or isolated oceanic airspace, anomalies are pronounced and unmistakable. However, over the Netherlands, the sky is anything but empty. Movement is the prevailing norm. Amid this constant motion, subtle irregularities can remain concealed. For this reason, some researchers discreetly refer to the Netherlands not as a hotspot, but as a corridor, a passage where phenomena traverse rather than originate. Commercial pilots arriving at and departing from Schiphol Airport often describe the Dutch approach trajectories as among the busiest in Europe. Aircraft descend in meticulously timed intervals, threading through weather systems and designated airspace corridors. Military training flights from NATO installations intersect with civilian routes at elevated altitudes. Helicopters operate in steady rhythms to service offshore platforms. Consequently, the result is an airspace imbued with intent. Yet, within these layers, gaps emerge. Brief periods when radar coverage overlaps imperfectly, times when atmospheric conditions distort signals, instances where an object may be visible to the naked eye, yet leaves no discernible electronic footprint. These gaps represent the backdrop against which many Dutch UAP reports manifest. Unlike gaudy landings or extended encounters, Dutch sightings frequently appear as ephemeral. A light flickers, maneuvers in an unanticipated manner, and then vanishes. A silhouette traverses a section of the sky at an angle that fails to conform to known flight patterns. An object may hover momentarily near the coastline before melding into the cloud cover. Witnesses often exhibit reluctance to report such episodes, not due to skepticism of their observations, but rather because they assume another party must have an explanation. Perhaps air traffic control, maybe the military, possibly the harbor authority. Surely someone must possess the answer. Yet, when they follow up, they often receive a uniform response. Nothing unusual has been recorded. This reply is not inherently disingenuous. Rather, it underscores the limitations inherent in systems crafted for specific purposes. For example, radar systems are optimized to detect objects with established characteristics: speed, size, transponder signals. Objects that diverge from those parameters may be automatically filtered out. Weather radar excludes solid objects, while military radar prioritizes threats, not anomalies. Consequently, an object exhibiting unusual behavior but posing no immediate risk may evade detection. Through time, these unobserved instances accumulate. Civilian organizations within the Netherlands have meticulously cataloged hundreds of such reports. When charted, a fascinating pattern emerges. Numerous sightings congregate along coastlines, river deltas, and approach trajectories leading to major airports. These delineated spaces represent borders between land and sea, controlled and uncontrolled airspace, civilian and military territories. Amsterdam occupies a pivotal position in this intricate tapestry. Its geographical placement situates the city beneath extensive transcontinental flight paths. Aircraft embarking from North America commence their descent over the North Sea, trace a path across the Dutch coastline, and converge on Schiphol Airport. Concurrently, military aircraft from various NATO allies traverse the adjacent airspace as part of their operational exercises. This confluence of air traffic generates a web of complexities, which in turn fosters an atmosphere of ambiguity. Dutch pilots, particularly those piloting smaller aircraft, frequently report unidentified traffic that eludes detection on their instruments. Typically, these phenomena are later rationalized as gliders, drones, or peculiar reflections. Yet on occasion, an explanation proves elusive. In such cases, these encounters often conclude without fanfare. There is a lack of follow-up, no public records kept, just a brief mention in a logbook or a tale recounted in whispered tones years down the line. The North Sea is undeniably significant to this corridor effect. Offshore platforms operate continuously, their lights piercing the darkness of the water. Helicopters routinely navigate between the shore and these facilities, often flying perilously low. Naval vessels patrol these waters, engaged in maneuvers and surveillance efforts. This heightened activity crafts an aerial landscape where any unusual illuminations or motions can be easily dismissed as the byproducts of industrial or military operations. However, if something genuinely anomalous were to manifest, it would likely be witnessed by trained professionals, pilots, engineers, and radar operators well versed in the norms of what should occupy the skies. A notable number of Dutch UAP reports stem from individuals working offshore, men and women familiar with the rhythms of the sea and sky, adept at distinguishing the ordinary from the extraordinary. These witnesses often recount sightings of lights approaching platforms in silence, hovering momentarily before darting away at remarkable speeds. Frequently, they presume these objects to be part of military exercises, opting against formal reporting. Only retrospectively, when sharing notes, do they discover that no such exercises had been planned. These maritime encounters seldom grace the headlines, taking place far beyond populated areas. They leave no tangible evidence, challenging existing assumptions without demanding attention. On solid ground, similar dynamics unfold along rivers and within industrial zones. The Netherlands is interlaced with both natural and artificial waterways that refract light and warp perceptions. Towboats, cranes, and industrial structures generate shifting points of illumination that may mislead observers. Yet again, seasoned witnesses assert that some sightings defy these explanations. They describe movements devoid of mechanical cadence, accelerations accompanied by silence, and directional changes that resonate with a sense of purpose rather than randomness. Notably, many of these accounts exhibit a reserved tone. Witnesses refrain from claiming extraterrestrial interactions, instead remarking that they observed something they could not identify. This measured approach endows the accounts with a quiet authenticity, making them easily overlooked. In contrast to other countries that have developed formal UFO investigation units, the Netherlands has predominantly relied on improvised responses. Law enforcement may intervene if public safety becomes a concern, while military authorities might scrutinize radar data in the event of airspace infringements. However, there is no centralized effort dedicated to the thorough examination of unexplained aerial phenomena as a distinct category. Consequently, patterns that might be readily apparent at the national level remain disjointed. Each incident is treated in isolation, and this fundamental isolation obstructs comprehension. Some European researchers contend that this fragmentation has hampered the Netherlands' ability to acknowledge its potential status as a transit zone for unexplained phenomena. Objects that momentarily appear over Dutch territory could be constituents of broader patterns unfolding across the continent or beyond its borders. If this is the case, Amsterdam is not merely a destination but rather a waypoint, a junction where various paths intersect. This concept aligns with wider European observations, where similar corridor patterns were identified over Belgium in the late 1980s, across the English Channel, and along the Rye Valley. In every instance, high air traffic density and industrial undertakings engender circumstances where anomalies can glide by unnoticed or be casually dismissed. Valuable insights typically surface only when reports are analyzed in a cross-border context, yet such comparative efforts remain infrequent. National databases rarely align seamlessly. Linguistic barriers complicate collaboration, and jurisdictional challenges hinder data sharing. Thus, the larger picture remains obscured. Nonetheless, the clues exist. A triangle glimpsed over Belgium one evening, subsequently reported over the Netherlands days later. Lights first observed offshore, later appearing inland. Patterns suggestive of deliberate motion rather than mere happenstance. Amsterdam's role in this narrative is subtle yet persistent. While the city may not dominate the UAP discourse or showcase dramatic crashes or prolonged encounters, it offers a quieter, potentially more significant narrative. A steady buildup of instances where the sky behaved in unexpected ways, where trained observers faltered, and where official mechanisms failed to capture the nuances of human perception that recognized something amiss. In the next section, we will tighten our focus even further, descending from the national corridor to the very heart of the city, Amsterdam at night. Its geography, airspace, and unique conditions create both opportunities and illusions for those who take the time to gaze upwards. Awaits. Amsterdam after the sun sets. The character of the city transforms as darkness falls. While the daylight hours are filled with energy and motion, bicycles weaving through the narrow streets, boats gliding along serene canals, and aircraft curving along hidden airways, the nighttime atmosphere softens. Lights become warmer installations, sounds resonate more profoundly, and reflections cascade endlessly. In this tranquil state, the sky above Amsterdam can both deceive and, at times, reveal illuminating truths. Geographically, Amsterdam distinguishes itself from many other major urban centers. The city, hovering just above sea level, is encircled by water and reclaimed land. The horizon lies low and unobstructed, devoid of towering mountains that might block the view or high ridges that could frame the sky. Instead, Amsterdam unfolds outward, its skyline understated, its periphery broad and inviting. This openness cultivates extensive sightlines. A distant light can create an illusion of proximity, while a leisurely moving object may seem to hover in place. Reflections cast by water and glass can multiply, stretch, or distort visual perceptions, creating an almost dreamlike quality. Simultaneously, Amsterdam's modest elevation offers an unusual clarity. When an object moves contrary to the typical flow, traversing the sky at an atypical angle or velocity, it becomes conspicuous. Above this unique urban landscape lies one of the most intricate airspaces in Europe. Schiphol Airport, located just southwest of the city, serves as a magnetic hub for aviation. Arrival and departure trajectories radiate outward like spokes of a wheel, directing aircraft over suburban areas, waterways, and open fields. These routes are meticulously choreographed, continuously adjusted to account for wind patterns, weather variations, and air traffic density. For those residing beneath these elevated routes, the sound of aircraft is a familiar, almost comforting presence. They recognize the distinctive roar of engines and the rhythmic blinking of navigation lights. They understand the nuanced behavior of planes as they bank, ascend, and descend. This familiarity hones their perception. When something deviates from the established pattern of airplane behavior, it draws attention. However, not all pockets of Amsterdam dwell directly under bustling flight paths. Certain neighborhoods, particularly those nearer to the coast or extending further east, enjoy quieter skies. Here, the pervasive background noise of aviation diminishes, allowing for clearer visibility of the night sky. It is within these areas that a significant number of unusual sightings emerge. Canals play a crucial role in shaping perceptions of the sky, as water reflects light upwards, washing clouds with a soft luminosity. Low-hanging cloud cover above Amsterdam frequently emits a gentle glow, creating an ethereal ceiling. Objects traversing beneath this canopy can appear darkened or outlined, even if they produce little illumination themselves. This phenomenon can render commonplace aircraft into unrecognizable forms, yet it can also enhance the visibility of genuinely anomalous objects. Witness accounts often recount personal experiences of observing dark shapes against illuminated clouds, figures devoid of lights, movements that lack sound. These observations are particularly disconcerting due to their absence of familiar signals. The architecture of Amsterdam introduces another level of intricacy. Glass facades, office buildings, and residential windows reflect points of light in unpredictable patterns. A single light source can manifest as numerous moving points, particularly when perceived from varying angles or through atmospheric disturbances. This peculiarity has led to countless misidentifications over the years. Yet, seasoned observers note that not all reported sightings conform to this ambiguous pattern. They describe objects that maintain consistent form and motion irrespective of perspective. Some objects glide seamlessly over water and land without altering their behavior. Others appear impervious to wind conditions. The observer community in Amsterdam is diverse, encompassing late-night workers leaving their corporate duties, taxi drivers pausing at red lights, residents strolling with dogs alongside tranquil canals, and those in aviation roles, such as pilots, and air traffic controllers who remain vigilant regarding the sky. Each group brings a distinctive perspective, noticing nuances often overlooked by others. Occasionally, these varied perspectives intersect. Multiple witnesses might recount the same sighting from disparate locations throughout the city, detailing similar movements, timings, and impressions. During these fleeting moments, Amsterdam transforms into a web of observers, unified not by communication, but by shared perception. While such instances are infrequent, their impact resonates. The city's long-standing tradition of tolerance and curiosity informs how these unique experiences are absorbed. Amsterdam has historically been a crucible for unconventional ideas to flourish alongside practicality. As a result, when someone claims to have encountered something peculiar, the general reaction leans towards mild interest rather than fear. What do you think it could have been? This cultural disposition mitigates panic, but also reduces the likelihood of sensationalism. Unusual occurrences meld into the city's ambient discourse, emerging as anecdotes rather than headlines. Meanwhile, airspace authorities maintain a delicate equilibrium, prioritizing safety over mystery. If an object poses no immediate threat to aircraft, it may not justify urgent intervention. In the absence of any radar indication of anomalies, further investigation may seem unwarranted. This pragmatic stance ensures smooth operations, yet it can create voids, instances where human observation detects something that instruments miss. While instruments provide precision, they lack omniscience. They sift through data based on established expectations, disregarding elements that fail to fit established parameters. Human observers, however, are acutely aware of context, keenly sensing when something feels amiss. This ongoing friction between technology and intuition resonates throughout many of Amsterdam's sightings. Witnesses frequently mention consulting flight tracking applications in real time, searching for helicopters, straining to hear sounds, and waiting for the reassuring presence of blinking lights. When none of these reassuring cues appear, discomfort grows. The object may linger for seconds or minutes before vanishing, leaving a trail of unresolved questions. Weather also plays a subtle yet pivotal role. The maritime climate of the Netherlands often yields frequent cloud cover, fog, and reduced visibility. These atmospheric conditions can obscure or expose objects in unforeseen manners. A temporary break in the clouds might illuminate a moving light like a theatrical spotlight, while thin cloud blankets can make objects appear to fade in and out of existence. Temperature inversions possess the ability to bend light and sound. All of this renders interpretation more complex, yet mere weather phenomena cannot account for every sighting. Some anomalies manifest on clear, starry nights, while others exhibit movements inconsistent with atmospheric influences. The diverse array of situations in which these events transpire contributes to their allure. Additionally, Amsterdam's proximity to the North Sea introduces considerations of military and commercial maritime activities. Naval exercises can sporadically take place offshore, while aircraft patrol the coastal regions, further complicating the aerial tapestry above this vibrant city. Signals and lights traverse in patterns that remain enigmatic to the average observer. While this activity offers plausible explanations for some sightings, it also engenders a myriad of questions. What compels an object to hover silent over a neighborhood? Why does it glide inland only to return seaward? Why is there no advance notice of such phenomena? These inquiries linger in the minds of many. They do not seek extraordinary explanations, but instead resist simplistic resolutions. Over time, the residents of Amsterdam cultivate a subtle vigilance. Every now and then, they glance skyward. They discern patterns and catalog anomalies, yet many fail to report their observations. A select few choose to share their encounters, while a handful meticulously document their experiences. Occasionally, these detailed records resurface years later, especially when similar accounts come to light. This delayed recognition bears significance. It implies that Amsterdam's narrative surrounding unidentified aerial phenomena is more about gradual realization than abrupt revelation. Small instances scattered throughout decades coalesce to form a comprehensive narrative tapestry. In the following section, we shall delve into one of the most remarkable instances when this intricate mosaic momentarily crystallized. It was a night when the skies over Amsterdam captured widespread attention. Authorities, media representatives, and citizens alike directed their gaze skyward in unison, blurring the lines between explanation and uncertainty. A city looks heavenward. On the evening of March 3, 1988, Amsterdam harbored no expectations for anything out of the ordinary. It was just an everyday Thursday night. Traffic flowed steadily along the ring roads. Flights departed and arrived at Schiphol Airport according to schedule. Within residences, televisions cast a soft luminescence as families immersed themselves in their nightly routines. Then, just after sunset, the first call arrived. An onlooker, positioned north of Amsterdam, reported 3 bright lights hovering unnaturally at the horizon's edge. The caller failed to identify them as aircraft. They did not blink or follow known flight paths. Instead, they seemed to oscillate, gradually shifting positions before coming to a standstill again. The report was relayed to Schiphol's air traffic control tower. Within moments, controllers stepped outside to observe the situation for themselves. What they beheld was enough to elevate the urgency. Air traffic controllers are trained observers, honed in on distinguishing aircraft by their light patterns, speed, altitude, and behavior. Upon encountering something that did not immediately fit their mental database, protocol mandated scrutiny. Radar systems underwent inspection. No unidentified contacts appeared. 3 distinct radar installations, both civil and military, recorded nothing out of the ordinary in the stipulated vicinity. This inconsistency bred uncertainty. The lights were discernible to the naked eye, yet remained undetected by instruments. As word circulated internally, supervisors were alerted. Aeronautical police were engaged, and a decision was made to notify ground patrol units and meticulously observe the situation. Exiting the controlled setting of the tower, Amsterdam began to react in its characteristic manner. Police dispatch centers began fielding calls from residents throughout the city. Accounts of lights in the sky poured in. Some described triangular arrangements, while others witnessed a singular bright light fracturing into multiple sources. A few insisted that the lights were approaching the airport. News outlets quickly caught wind of the developing story. Radio stations interrupted regular programming to discuss potential UFO sightings. Journalists reached out to Schiphol for validation. Rumors proliferated at a pace that outstripped factual reporting. By late evening, police lines were inundated with numerous calls. Some callers expressed calm curiosity. Others were animated. A handful exhibited genuine fear. One dispatcher later reminisced about the surreal atmosphere of the night, quipping that it felt as though benign extraterrestrial visitors were checking in at the front desk. Behind the humor lay a more profound uncertainty. At that point, no one could elucidate the phenomena being observed. Air traffic continued at Schiphol, albeit with heightened caution. Pilots nearing the airport noted no unusual objects on their final approach, although some did mention distant lights. Controllers increased the distance between aircraft, erring on the side of prudence. Meanwhile, a police helicopter took off toward the source of the lights. As it ventured westward toward the industrial harbor area, clarity began to surface. The helicopter crew identified a cluster of substantial construction cranes at the Nissan terminal, each outfitted with powerful floodlights. These lights, positioned at significant height and angled upward, emitted brilliant points that reflected off the low-hanging cloud cover. From a distance, the lights appeared to float in the atmosphere. As clouds shifted and winds altered their positions, the reflections gave the illusion of oscillation. Observers from various viewpoints throughout the city perceived the lights as moving in unison. The visual deception was striking. In certain locations, the reflections even formed triangular shapes, captivating the imagination. Complicating matters further, two bright planets, Venus and Jupiter, nestled unusually close to one another in the night sky that evening. To the untrained eye, their proximity could easily have been misinterpreted as a hovering object. In conjunction, these elements created a perfect tempest of misperception: artificial illumination, low cloud cover, astronomical happenstance, and a city primed to detect the unusual. As the helicopter crew shared their insights, authorities began weaving together a plausible narrative. The cranes emerged as the primary source of the mysterious lights, while the planets accounted for additional sightings. Gradually, the situation de-escalated. Police dispatchers relayed the findings to anxious callers, radio stations revised their broadcasts, and Schiphol resumed its normal operations. By midnight, the city largely returned to its tranquil state. Formally, the case was deemed resolved. In subsequent days, newspapers published headlines that varied from humorous to skeptical. Some ridiculed the city for panicking over construction lights, while others commended the authorities for managing the situation with integrity. For many, the incident transformed into a mere footnote, a comedic recollection illustrating how easily individuals can be misled. However, for others, that night left a more profound mark. Not due to the ultimate identification of the lights, but because of what it laid bare. It revealed the alarming speed with which uncertainty can proliferate, even within a meticulously regulated environment. This episode illustrated that even seasoned professionals could encounter the unidentified and, for a fleeting moment, experience doubt. It brought to light the discrepancies between human observation and technological systems, underscoring how readily people accept explanations when they are presented, even if they fail to account for every nuance. Some bystanders insisted that their observations did not align with mere construction lights. They recounted movement patterns that defied the characteristics of stationary sources and highlighted changes in luminosity and position that appeared deliberate. Others, while accepting the official explanation, found themselves still troubled by the authenticity of their experience. In subsequent interviews, air traffic controllers engaged in the incident asserted that they never perceived the lights as a threat. However, they readily acknowledged that, during a brief interval, they could not categorize them with certainty. This uncertainty holds significance. It implies that even in a city as rigorously monitored as Amsterdam, occasions arise when the sky eludes immediate classification. The 1988 incident is frequently cited by skeptics as a quintessential case of mass misidentification, and indeed it is in many respects. Yet it also serves as a poignant reminder of how delicate certainty can prove to be. Had the helicopter taken a different route, had the clouds loomed thicker, or had the planets not been in sight, the explanation may have taken longer to surface. In that interval, speculation would have undoubtedly escalated. This situation invites a critical inquiry. How many other nights passed uneventfully without helicopters or media scrutiny when similar lights flared and faded, remaining unsolved? How frequently did witnesses glance skyward, hesitate, and ultimately choose not to report their sightings? The 1988 event stands out precisely because it broke the monotony. It compelled a reaction. It generated records. It produced documentation. Most sightings, on the other hand, do not. They unfold in solitude, leaving no trace. They are remembered solely by those fortunate enough to witness them. In this way, the Amsterdam Schiphol incident is both enlightening and deceptive. It reveals how effortlessly extraordinary interpretations can emerge, yet it illustrates the rarity of a city collectively confronting uncertainty regarding its atmosphere. In the years following the event, the incident has drawn the attention of researchers and journalists alike. Some frame it as a cautionary narrative, while others view it as evidence that even rational frameworks can become temporarily ensnared by ambiguity. For our discussion, it serves as a pivotal moment, a juncture where Amsterdam collectively looked up, and a reminder that beneath every explanation is an initial moment steeped in unknowing. In the upcoming section, we will delve into what transpires once such moments recede, how authorities navigate uncertainty, how civilian bewilderment is addressed or disregarded, and how silence emerges as a strategy. Military silence and civilian confusion. As an unusual event fades from public scrutiny, what lingers is often silence, not merely the absence of sound, but the absence of clarification. In the Netherlands, as in much of Europe, silence has historically been the preferred response to unexplained aerial phenomena. This silence is not inherently conspiratorial, rather, it is typically procedural. Military and aviation authorities are trained to articulate only when certainty prevails. When an occurrence cannot be distinctly identified, it is often categorized, saved for records, and set aside. The rationale is straightforward. If no threat exists, public discourse is deemed unnecessary. However, this methodology carries implications. For civilians who witness something extraordinary, silence breeds confusion. They report their experiences, anticipating clarity, only to find themselves confronted with neutral terminology, vague assurances, or no response whatsoever. Over time, this pattern erodes trust, not due to assumptions of deception, but because uncertainty remains unaddressed. Following the 1988 Amsterdam Schiphol incident, Dutch authorities adopted an even more cautious stance. Internally, the event was marked resolved. Externally, it morphed into an exemplar of how easily public anxiety could spiral. The lesson internalized by institutions was not to investigate further, but to communicate less. This lesson endured. When isolated sightings arose in the years that followed, responses were intentionally minimal. Police logs might record a call, air traffic control could monitor radar, and military offices might quietly confirm whether an exercise was in progress. If no apparent explanation emerged, the matter would cease there. No press releases, no follow-ups, no acknowledgement that something unaccounted for had transpired. This strategy aligns with broader European practices. Unlike the United States, which once maintained a dedicated UFO investigation program during the Cold War, most European nations treated unexplained sightings as anomalies, lacking the merit for extended inquiry. While exceptions existed, such as France's GAN program, the Netherlands chose not to develop a comparable initiative. Responsibility instead became fragmented. Civil aviation managed air safety, the military addressed air defense, and the police attended to public concern. No singular entity claimed ownership of the unknown. This fragmentation resulted in scenarios where even when various agencies confronted the same event, their perspectives seldom converged. A police officer might observe lights and generate a report. A pilot could recognize something peculiar and mention it informally. A radar operator might note atypical returns and dismiss them as mere interference. Each fragment existed in isolation. No one pieced together the puzzle. For civilians, this process remained opaque. Individuals reporting sightings often received courteous yet non-committal responses. They were informed that the object was potentially an aircraft or perhaps a meteorological phenomenon. At times, they received no information at all. In the rare instances when inquiries were met with guidance, it was not due to the inaccuracy of the reporter, but rather because there was simply no more to elaborate on. This absence of resolution inadvertently fostered an unintended consequence. Such interactions nudged the conversation surrounding unexplainable phenomena out of formal discourse and into less official realms. Tales resurfaced in coffee shops, digital platforms, and intimate community gatherings. Enthusiastic amateurs began to compile testimony. Independent civilian collectives emerged, dedicated to the cataloging of sightings without the support or sanction of official bodies. Their motivations did not revolve around establishing proof of extraterrestrial visitors. Rather, they aimed to archive what others had chosen to overlook. In the Netherlands, this community-driven documentation unveiled trends that had eluded conventional channels. They uncovered concentrated sightings near military installations, consistent reports along coastal pathways, and recurrent descriptions spanning decades. While none of this established irrefutable evidence of the extraordinary, it implied that the silence enveloping these occurrences concealed a deeper complexity. In particular, the reticence of military sources became a source of subtle frustration. Not due to a public clamor for sensational exposure, but because the lack of acknowledgement created a sense of disconnection. When a government acknowledges uncertainty, it creates a bridge of understanding. Conversely, silence breeds distance. Occasionally, retired Dutch military personnel reflect on this dynamic post-service. They describe an environment where ambiguous events were documented but rarely discussed. One former radar technician recounted witnessing unusual radar returns that did not correlate with known aircraft designs. His immediate assumption was interference, leading him to move on without further inquiry. Years later, upon hearing analogous accounts, he began to question whether he should have probed deeper. Another retired officer conveyed a sighting he experienced during an exercise. After reporting it through the appropriate channels, he was simply instructed to forget the matter. There were no consequences, no rationale offered, just an end to the conversation through dismissal. These narratives are devoid of theatrical drama. They lack confrontation or conspiracy. In their ordinariness lies their significance. They suggest that the framework was crafted not for the exploration of the unknown, but to mitigate risk. If an object was deemed harmless, it did not warrant further scrutiny. If it could not be identified, it was dismissed from consideration. This approach ensured operational efficiency, yet it created voids in comprehension. Within these voids, civilian bewilderment flourished. Individuals encountering unexplainable sightings often questioned their own perceptions. They pondered whether they had fabricated their experiences. They refrained from open discourse, anxious about potential ridicule or dismissal. This reticence led to a decline in reporting. A decrease in reports, in turn, bolstered the belief that nothing out of the ordinary was occurring. Thus, a quiet feedback loop emerged. Occasionally, this cycle would be disrupted. A journalist might produce a retrospective piece, a documentary could air, or a foreign disclosure would spark renewed interest. With each event, Dutch audiences would take a moment to reconsider their historical accounts of sightings. Yet, over time, attention would wane once more. The resultant atmosphere is one in which unexplained phenomena linger at the periphery, neither outright denied nor validated, simply left unresolved. For Amsterdam, this translates to an understated relevance within the narratives of unidentified aerial phenomena, with its incidents acknowledged but seldom pursued comprehensively. The testimony of witnesses is acknowledged yet seldom investigated further. This is not indicative of a lack of occurrences over Amsterdam. Rather, it reflects the reality that such events do not easily conform to prevailing paradigms. In the absence of official inquiry, civilian curiosity remains persistent and patient. It accumulates over time and resurfaces whenever circumstances permit. In the following section, we will turn our focus from civilian bewilderment and institutional reticence to explore one of the Netherlands' most captivating military incidents. An episode that resisted trivialization, involving numerous trained observers, and continues to provoke inquiry decades later. Zeeburg, the Netherlands' closest encounter. On an early winter morning in 1979, an unidentified object traversed Zeeburg Air Base, ultimately becoming one of the most significant unexplained aerial interactions in Dutch history. Situated northeast of Utrecht and surrounded by timbered lands and open fields, Zeeburg was, at the time, a joint Dutch-American military facility extensively utilized by NATO forces during the Cold War. The base was accustomed to the sounds of aircraft, nocturnal operations, and classified missions. However, the events of that night bore no resemblance to any of these. Just before dawn on the 3rd of February, numerous personnel on duty observed an unusual radiance in the sky above the base. Initially, it manifested as a diffuse glow, soft, pale, and seemingly suspended. There was no discernible engine noise, no predictable flight path, no radio communication. As they watched, the light sharpened into focus, revealing a large, dark, triangular form gliding slowly overhead. Its enormity overshadowed any aircraft the witnesses had previously encountered. On its underside, several luminous points were symmetrically arranged. At intervals, beams of light appeared to emanate downwards, illuminating the ground below. Remarkably, despite its size and nearness, the object emitted no sound whatsoever. This detail was consistently reiterated in each subsequent relay of the encounter. No humming, no vibrations, no atmospheric turbulence. Only silence. At least 12 witnesses directly observed the anomaly. Significantly, these were not civilians, but military professionals trained to recognize aircraft under low-light conditions. Among them were Air Force technicians, security personnel, and officers boasting years of expertise. None were able to classify the entity they observed. The object moved languidly across the base and then came to a halt. Its hovering presence was perhaps the most disconcerting aspect of the encounter. Aircraft simply do not linger silently without discernible means of lift. Helicopters generate noise and downwash, while fixed-wing craft necessitate forward momentum. This object did neither. After a brief interval, with estimates varying from mere seconds to a handful of minutes, the object accelerated effortlessly and vacated the vicinity. There was no thunderous sonic boom, nor any sudden alteration in sound. It simply glided away, departing more swiftly than it had arrived. Radar systems stationed at the base detected nothing extraordinary, no unidentified targets, no anomalies. This absence of radar documentation would later complicate subsequent analyses. In the immediate wake of the incident, personnel initiated reports through official channels. An internal assessment was promptly underway. Testimonials were gathered. Conversations unfolded in private settings. Then, an unsettling hush ensued. No public declaration was issued. No official rationale was provided at the time. Years later, fragments of the investigation began to emerge, drawn to light through civilian inquiries and the fascination of the media. Eventually, a reconstruction of the event made its way to Dutch radio, where it included interviews with several witnesses. The official narrative released was curiously vague. The object received description as an unknown aerial system of lights. No identifiable aircraft was noted. No recognized natural phenomenon was established. The military suggested potential explanations such as a heat mirage or an atmospheric anomaly, though witnesses firmly rejected this notion, asserting that the object exhibited a distinct solid configuration. What renders the Surberg incident particularly captivating is not merely the sighting itself, but also the unwavering consistency of the testimonies. Decades later, those who witnessed the event still recounted the same particulars. The triangular form, the radiant lights, the profound silence, the hovering presence, the meticulously controlled movement. A retired officer publicly expressed his conviction that the object was both authentic and structurally formed. He outright dismissed the mirage hypothesis, observing that multiple individuals had perceived the same phenomenon from various perspectives. Another witness described the emotional ramifications, recalling a wave of confusion rather than fear, a sensation that something entirely beyond their comprehension had invaded their reality. Importantly, none of the witnesses alleged extraterrestrial interaction or intention. They merely asserted that the object defied classification with any conventional aircraft. Over time, the Surberg case quietly garnered a reputation as the closest equivalent in the Netherlands to more renowned military UFO encounters found elsewhere. Researchers occasionally referenced it as the country's Roswell, though the comparison fell short. There was no crash, no remnants, no recovery, just an encounter and a collective choice to move forward. The base continued its operations. Personnel rotated in and out, records were meticulously archived. Yet, the incident was far from forgotten. It resurfaced intermittently in books, documentaries, and interviews, each instance rekindling debates regarding the handling of such events. Why was the explanation so tentative? Why was a thorough investigation not undertaken? Why did witnesses experience discouragement in sharing their observations publicly for years? These inquiries lead back to the broader culture of silence that was previously discussed. The context of the Cold War looms large. In 1979, NATO remained on high alert. Military confidentiality took precedence. Any unexplained occurrence over a sensitive installation represented a potential security risk. Public discourse had the potential to invite speculation, misinformation, or even panic. Within that environment, it made sense to minimize attention. However, with the benefit of hindsight, the lack of transparency now feels deeply unsatisfying, particularly because the incident presented no clear threat, only an unknown entity. Some researchers have postulated advanced military technology as a probable explanation. Theories of black project aircraft, experimental platforms, or even foreign surveillance devices have emerged. Yet, no known technology from that era aligns with the behavior observed. Stealth aircraft were in development, yet none were understood to hover silently or emit beams of light directed downward. No nation has since claimed culpability. Others have suggested atmospheric plasma phenomena or rare optical effects. While such phenomena have been documented, they seldom yield the consistent geometric configurations seen concurrently by multiple trained observers. The absence of radar data creates a layer of complexity for every theory. It implies that either the object did not reflect radar in an expected manner, or that the systems were inadequately tuned to detect it. Both possibilities open a shimmering portal of further inquiries. What is indisputable is that the Sisterberg incident challenged entrenched assumptions. It illustrated that even in tightly governed military settings, unexplained aerial phenomena can manifest. Additionally, it laid bare how institutions respond when confronted with uncertainty, primarily by restricting communication and limiting scrutiny. For the broader narrative of Amsterdam, Sisterberg matters significantly because it establishes a precedent. It underscores that the Netherlands has faced credible UAP encounters of a serious nature. No unsubstantiated rumors, no distant flickers, but close-quarters observations by professional individuals. This context recasts subsequent civilian sightings across the country. When citizens of Amsterdam relay accounts of peculiar objects, their experiences are set against the backdrop of a nation already having quietly encountered the unknown at a military level. The Soestberg witnesses did not seek notoriety. They did not capitalize on their experiences. Instead, they patiently waited, sometimes for decades, to share their accounts. And when they finally did, their narratives echoed. As we progress further, we will traverse from Cold War secrecy into contemporary skies, from military installations into civilian neighborhoods. We shall delve into how the forms observed at Sisterberg, particularly the silent triangle, re-emerged time and again in later reports from the Netherlands. Focuses on black triangles hovering over Holland. In the decades following the Soderberg event, the Netherlands underwent transformation. Airbases saw restructuring, technology advanced at an unprecedented pace, civilian aviation experienced dramatic growth, radar systems evolved to become more sophisticated, the number of satellites in orbit increased, and public access to flight. Tracking information became commonplace. And yet, notwithstanding all this advancement, a familiar silhouette began to resurface. The black triangle. In contrast to the transient lights of past decades, these contemporary sightings were frequently characterized by remarkable uniformity. Individuals across varying regions, years, and situations reported sightings of objects defined by three distinct edges, dark against the evening sky, maneuvering with purposeful precision. Most strikingly, these objects emitted silence. Such sightings did not amass around singular, remarkable events. Instead, they emerged sporadically, almost clandestinely, often communicated days or weeks post-encounter. Sometimes reports materialized only when a witness recognized that others had experienced something akin. One of the earliest notable reports in this modern era took place in the late 1990s when inhabitants of rural Northbrant detailed the observation of a sizable triangular object gliding slowly above during the early evening hours. It operated at a height that allowed its outline to be distinctly discernible amidst the cloud cover, yet it maintained an altitude sufficiently elevated to alleviate any immediate sense of threat. In that moment, the incident garnered minimal attention. It would not be until years later that the emergence of similar sightings elsewhere highlighted a discernible pattern. By the 2010s, occurrences of black triangles traversing the Netherlands began to proliferate. Some of these incidents coincided with known military drills, while others did not. Witnesses encompassed civilians, commercial aviators, and occasionally law enforcement personnel. A particularly significant cluster materialized in early 2020. On the evening of February 26th, several residents in towns north of Amsterdam, including Parend and Heer Hugowaard, reported the sighting of an imposing triangular object gliding languidly across the sky. This object was characterized as dark, adorned with faint luminescence at each corner and a central glow. It moved in a straight trajectory, unaffected by prevailing winds. Silence reigned. Observers conveyed a sense of scale that was challenging to articulate. The object appeared vast, closer than a commercial airliner, yet its movement displayed a steadiness that implied deliberate control. Some onlookers initially posited that it was a military craft. Others turned to flight tracking applications on their devices, only to discover no recorded presence of aircraft. No helicopters were scheduled for the area, and no exercises had been publicized. In the following days, similar reports burgeoned from Almere and surrounding areas east of Amsterdam, indicating that the object, or objects, had maintained a consistent trajectory. Later that year, in December, 3 independent witnesses detailed yet another triangular object above Bloemendaal in Haarlem. Once more, the descriptions aligned. A dark form, triangular in design, moving slowly and silently. Each witness lacked prior acquaintance with one another and sought no public recognition. All conveyed a hesitance surrounding their reports, a reluctance that became notable. This trepidation is a recurring motif. Contemporary Dutch witnesses often hesitate to openly discuss UAP sightings. The inherent cultural inclination toward reticence lingers. Individuals fear being misunderstood, ridiculed, or mistaken. Consequently, numerous reports only emerge through civilian reporting platforms or within private discussions. When analyzed collectively, distinct features come into focus. Primarily, the objects are consistently articulated as solid constructs. Not patterns of lights, not mere reflections, but discernible forms with structure. Secondly, their movements exhibit a smooth, measured quality. No erratic behavior, no abrupt changes in direction. Thirdly, they maintain silence. This absence of sound differentiates them from drones, helicopters, and many known aircraft types. Finally, they appear to operate at relatively low altitudes, low enough to be observed clearly yet elevated enough to avoid immediate engagement. These characteristics echo the Soderbergh incident in disconcerting ways. Separated by decades and technological advancements, witnesses convey similar fundamental traits. This raises troubling inquiries. If the objects stem from military origins, why do they repeatedly appear above civilian regions without acknowledgement? If they represent experimental crafts, why are they so widely detected yet never officially validated? And if they belong to an entirely different phenomenon, why do they adhere to consistent patterns? Skeptical interpretations often center on advanced military capabilities. Some posit that these could serve as foreign surveillance systems, perhaps testing stealth attributes. Others propose classified NATO aircraft undertaking operations cloaked in secrecy. However, no identifiable crafts, whether publicly known or classified, have been demonstrated to match the reported characteristics comprehensively. While stealth aircraft exist, they still produce sound. Drones exist, yet their operational endurance, size, and silence are inherently limited. Furthermore, the Netherlands serves as a NATO ally. Conducting unannounced tests over densely populated territories, would bear significant political sensitivity and risk. Another proposed explanation relates to perceptual illusions. Human vision can falter when attempting to decipher dark objects against night skies, particularly when visual reference points are scarce. A formation of lights could easily be misconstrued as a solid structure. Yet this explanation falters when witnesses detail edges, surfaces, and consistent geometry. Particularly compelling are accounts from pilots. Commercial aviators navigating near Dutch airspace have occasionally documented dark forms passing beneath or adjacent to their aircraft. Such reports are scarce, with most pilots opting not to escalate them unless safety is precarious. When they do, the responses are generally procedural. No matching radar engagement, no recognized traffic, case closed. Nonetheless, the pilots recall that police officers have also reported similar observations during patrols. In one instance, 2 officers halted their vehicle to observe a triangular object traversing above a canal. They watched it for nearly a minute before it vanished into the cloud cover. They submitted a report. It went unanswered. The absence of follow-up does not signify dismissal. Rather, it means the report did not fit into any existing response framework. In this regard, contemporary black triangle sightings occupy an uneasy realm. They are too consistent to disregard, too infrequent to prioritize, and too ambiguous to readily explain. For Amsterdam, these observations further solidify the notion of the city as a transit point. The triangles do not linger in the sky, they traverse swiftly. Their flight paths convey a sense of navigation rather than mere randomness, frequently aligning with corridors that connect coastal areas to inland regions or straddle the margins of military airspaces and unrestricted skies. This specific movement dynamic lends credence to the corridor theory, suggesting that the Netherlands, and Amsterdam in particular, is not merely a destination, but more akin to a thoroughfare, an expanse where something passes briefly through, only to become invisible once more. This raises the question, what is being exchanged between these points? The answer remains elusive. Yet, the repeated nature of these sightings carries significance. It implies continuity. That whatever phenomenon was observed over Soestberg did not cease its journey there. This is not an occurrence tied to a singular time period. Instead, it has evolved. It has persisted, quietly navigating the shadows of our awareness. As we progress, we will expand our perspective once again, gazing beyond the city limits, beyond the terrain, to the expansive waters of the North Sea, where maritime activities, industrial pursuits, and military operations converge, environments that have witnessed some of the most fascinating Dutch encounters over the years. Presents an exploration of pilots, police, and the reports that often remain confined within institutional walls. Not every sighting emerges from the vantage of civilians enjoying their backyards or leisurely strolls along tranquil canals. A significant portion of these sightings belongs to individuals whose professions compel them to scrutinize the sky with acute precision. Pilots, law enforcement officers, air traffic controllers, people trained not solely to observe, but to discern. In the Netherlands, many compelling reports of unidentified aerial phenomena originate from these trained observers. Paradoxically, however, these observations tend to be the least likely to surface in public discourse. The underlying reason is not so much a veil of secrecy, but rather procedural protocols. For pilots, the sky presents itself as a workplace. Anomalies in the sky are assessed predominantly through the lens of safety. If an object poses no threat to flight operations, it might receive only a fleeting mention, if any at all. Commercial pilots approaching Schiphol are well acquainted with the intricacies of complex airspace. They anticipate encounters with traffic at varying altitudes. They rely heavily on instruments, radar information, and communications with control towers to maintain an accurate situational awareness. When an unusual object appears visually but fails to register instrumentally, the pilot is faced with a pivotal choice: to report it formally, initiating a series of bureaucratic steps and potential follow-up, or to mentally note the incident and move on. In the majority of situations, they opt for the latter. Several Dutch pilots have shared their experiences anonymously regarding such instances. They recount observing lights that exhibited motion patterns incompatible with known aircraft, or objects that flickered momentarily at the periphery of their vision before disappearing entirely. One pilot recounted an experience where he witnessed a dark silhouette glide beneath his aircraft as he descended, set against a backdrop of illuminated clouds. This unidentified shape moved deliberately, devoid of flashing lights or sound. After checking his instruments and discovering no corresponding traffic, he considered documenting the event. However, since it presented no risk, he continued the flight without further mention. By the time the aircraft landed, the encounter felt distant, almost surreal. He chose to remain silent about it. Police officers confront similar challenges. While patrolling the streets under the cover of night, they often find themselves the first to observe unusual occurrences overhead. Trained as vigilant monitors of their surroundings, when officers spot something out of the ordinary in the sky, they may pause momentarily to observe and exchange thoughts. However, if the sighting seems innocuous, they often decide against escalating the matter. Filing a report demands time, justification, and often a clear rationale for the incident. In cases where no discernible category exists, the report risks being neglected. Several police accounts from the past 2 decades allude to peculiar lights or unidentified aerial objects. Most of these reports are concise and factual, lacking any interpretative slant. They reside within the archives, unremarkable, not designed to trigger investigations unless they coincide with other pressing issues. Consequently, they largely elude public attention. Air traffic controllers find themselves in a distinct situation. Their focus remains on screens rather than the open skies. Their existence is anchored in data. When an anomaly manifests visually but fails to appear electronically, it creates a dissonance akin to a riddle. Controllers involved in such incidents often double-check systems, confer with colleagues, and ensure that no technical malfunction has occurred. If radar fails to indicate an object, the event may receive an internal note. However, the lack of corroborative evidence means there is little room for further action. One former controller recounted an episode during which a pilot reported a stationary light hovering along an approach path. The controller's radar revealed nothing. The light disappeared within minutes. The controller logged the communication, and that concluded the matter. These overlooked reports share common features. They are succinct, cautious, and avoid speculative narratives. Each tends to conclude without resolution. Over time, such observations contribute to an archive of uncertainty, neither dramatic enough to capture public attention nor trivial enough to be disregarded entirely. Civilian researchers who have obtained access to these reports through freedom of information requests liken them to quiet anomalies. They do not proclaim loudly. Instead, they whisper narratives of mystery. Patterns emerge only when these sightings are juxtaposed across years in various professions. The narrative of a pilot's experience resonates with that of a police officer's observation. A controller's log may align with a civilian report from the same evening. Individually, each account could appear dismissible. Collectively, however, they intimate an ongoing occurrence. A striking feature across these professional testimonies is the notable emotional restraint displayed by the witnesses. Rarely do they convey fear. More often, they articulate confusion or curiosity, accompanied by a feeling that something felt out of place yet posed no genuine threat. This emotional quality serves to differentiate these reports from more sensational narratives. They remain grounded, measured. Perhaps this is why they are frequently overlooked. The hesitation to file observations is further compounded by cultural influences. In the Netherlands, practicality and understatement prevail. Extraordinary claims often encounter skepticism. People are often advised against reading too much into ambiguous experiences. This cultural perspective profoundly influences how witnesses express their accounts. They tend to minimize their observations. They hedge their statements. They second-guess their own perceptions. A police officer may declare it was likely inconsequential. A pilot might remark that certainty eluded them. Such modifiers lessen the perceived gravity of the occurrence, yet they fail to eradicate its essence. Years down the line, as similar narratives come to light, witnesses may revisit these once dismissed instances with fresh insight. They come to understand that their experiences were not solitary. Quietly, often anonymously, they begin to share. In the Netherlands, civilian UAP organizations have emerged as sanctuaries for these reluctant admissions. Through confidential reporting channels, professionals can relay their experiences without fear of ridicule or repercussions. The accounts received frequently reveal a common thread. Skilled observers are encountering objects they cannot identify, feeling abandoned in their quest for further exploration. This void between observation and inquiry is not confined to the Netherlands. It resonates worldwide. Yet, in a nation as meticulously regulated as the Netherlands, this phenomenon is particularly notable. One might anticipate that any oddity would prompt thorough investigation, yet, instead, anomalies become assimilated and forgotten. This is not an oversight. It is a matter of prioritization. Safety takes precedence. Mystery is relegated to the background. Consequently, the most credible encounters often leave behind the faintest of traces. No photographs, no videos, only recollections and a fleeting mention in a ledger. As we venture further from land towards the sea, this pattern becomes even more pronounced. Over the North Sea, where jurisdiction is nebulous and activity intensifies, reports become more infrequent yet increasingly compelling. Platforms, vessels, and surveillance aircraft operate in seclusion, away from public scrutiny. When something unusual emerges in this realm, it is witnessed by few and documented even less. In the upcoming section, we will trace the corridor westward, traversing over dark waters to the offshore installations and naval routes where some of the Netherlands' most fascinating and least recognized encounters have transpired. Offshore platforms and discrete encounters. West of the Netherlands, beyond the final line of dunes and harbors, the terrain yields to the North Sea. By night, this vast expanse transforms into something entirely different. The water becomes dark and mirrored, the horizon vanishes. Navigation lights from ships and offshore structures punctuate the gloom like distant celestial bodies. Above, the sky appears more expansive, desolate, and exposed. It is in these remote locations, far removed from city illumination and civilian onlookers, that some of the most captivating Dutch UAP incidents have unfolded. The North Sea stands as one of the most industrialized bodies of water globally. Oil and gas platforms rise from the depths, interconnected by pipelines and incessantly serviced by helicopter flights. Cargo ships and fishing fleets traverse predetermined paths. Naval patrols engage in exercises and surveillance efforts. This activity creates a layered environment akin to Amsterdam's airspace, but more isolated. Fewer observers, diminished noise, heightening vulnerability to the unexpected. Personnel on offshore platforms become accustomed to scanning the skies. Helicopters arrive and depart at all hours. Climatic changes occur swiftly. Uncommon sights are part of daily life. Therefore, when something genuinely unfamiliar surfaces, it commands attention. Several offshore workers have recounted lights approaching platforms silently from the sea. These lights are typically characterized as spherical or oval, emitting a soft glow rather than a blaring brightness. They glide steadily, occasionally decelerating as they approach a structure. In some narratives, the light hovers momentarily, almost as if surveying. Then it departs, frequently accelerating upward or laterally at velocities that surpass conventional aircraft behavior. Such encounters rarely find their way into formal reports. Offshore workers often assume the presence of military activity. The North Sea is extensively patrolled. Exercises are routine. Questioning unusual sights is frequently discouraged, whether explicitly or implicitly, in environments where safety and conformity are paramount. However, when workers compare experiences later, inconsistencies surface. No drills were on the schedule, no aircraft recorded, and no naval exercises aligned with the descriptions given. In certain instances, platform operators have reached out to shore-based authorities to inquire about peculiar aerial phenomena. The responses tend to be neutral, indicating nothing was documented, no threats identified, and no further action warranted. The encounters quietly fade from collective memory. Naval vessels operating within the North Sea have also reported anomalous sightings. Sailors on night watch have described lights traversing low over the water, pacing alongside ships at a distance before veering off. These lights do not conform to known aircraft navigation patterns. They are too steady, too silent, and too controlled. Once again, the reports are minimal. Naval protocols emphasize discipline and discretion. Unexplained sightings are often logged without commentary and forgotten unless they present a clear operational concern. In rare circumstances, where logs have been reviewed years later, researchers have unearthed entries that record unknown lights or unidentified aerial objects, devoid of accompanying analyses. These notations are easily overlooked, buried within routine observations. Yet, they signify moments when experienced observers encountered phenomena outside their expectations. The North Sea's role as a passageway becomes particularly relevant here. Objects observed offshore are sometimes reported inland hours or days thereafter. A light seen near a platform one night is mirrored by a sighting over coastal towns the following evening. This temporal and spatial correlation hints at movement, suggesting transit rather than mere erratic appearances. The sea itself complicates the act of observation. Reflections off the water can distort perceptions. Weather systems shift swiftly. Temperature gradients can create optical illusions. However, yet again, not all encounters conform to these explanations. Some involve movements counter to prevailing winds. Some entail shifts in altitude without visible means of propulsion. Some involve proximity so close that the possibility of distant reflections can be dismissed. An offshore engineer recounted observing a luminous object as it descended from cloud cover toward a platform, then halted suddenly several hundred meters away. It hovered in silence for nearly a minute before rising directly upward and vanishing from sight. He brought this sighting to the attention of his supervisor, who merely shrugged in response. It was probably military, was the extent of the discourse that followed. This casual dismissal encompasses a larger trend. The North Sea, as an environment, compels the extraordinary to blend into the routine by necessity. When one's occupation revolves around constant engagement with machinery, the unpredictability of weather, and inherent risks, anomalies gradually transform into indistinct elements of the backdrop. Only those phenomena that disrupt the ordinary earn any measure of focus. Unidentified lights that flicker in and out of existence without ceremony do not meet the criteria for attention. Consequently, the North Sea's unexplained sightings remain significantly underrepresented in discussions about unidentified aerial phenomena. Their occurrences are often solitary, dispersed, and inadequately documented. Yet, they might harbor significance beyond their numbers as these events unfold in settings monitored by professionals. They often encompass close-range observations and align with patterns discerned elsewhere: unvoiced movement, controlled flight behavior, and familiar shapes. For the Netherlands, these offshore experiences stretch the corridor of sightings beyond mere terrestrial domains. They imply that whatever traverses Dutch airspace does not solely emanate from urban landscapes or military bases. Instead, it flows through both sea and sky, connecting structures, vessels, coastlines, and city centers. When viewed from this angle, Amsterdam emerges as a singular point within a grander network, where observers on land glimpse entities that have already traversed the maritime expanse. This redefinition alters our understanding of inland sightings. Lights illuminating the canals may have originations at sea. Triangular shapes noted over suburban areas may be following established routes into the interior. This corridor is not abstract or theoretical. It is a tangible construct, demarcated by geography, infrastructure, and the essence of movement. In the forthcoming section, we shall expand our examination beyond individual instances and specific locales to delve into how military alliances, remnants of the Cold War, and collective European airspace may have influenced both documented encounters and those left unspoken. We'll address NATO, Cold War airspace, and the implications of what has remained undisclosed. To unravel the reasons behind the abundance of unexplained aerial incidents in the Netherlands, one must revisit the foundational structure of European airspace, not just as it stands today, but how it was molded throughout the Cold War era. For a significant portion of the latter half of the 20th century, Europe was more than merely a continent. It served as a front line. Borders transcended mere political boundaries and took on a strategic significance. Airspace was no longer simply a passageway. It transformed into a surveillance network, layered with radar systems, early warning mechanisms, interceptor squadrons, and confidential protocols. In this framework, the Netherlands inhabited a crucial and sensitive role. As a founding member of NATO, it accommodated essential military facilities, radar installations, and airfields. Dutch airspace, therefore, constituted a segment of a larger defensive apparatus devised to identify and react to any incursion from the east. Every unidentified object was hypothetically a potential hazard. However, in pragmatic terms, not all anomalies could merit pursuit. The radar systems of that time, while potent, were not flawless. They wrestled with challenges posed by low-altitude artifacts, slowly traversing targets and unconventional flight trajectories. Atmospheric interferences, sea clutter, and electronic noise frequently produced false returns. Operators quickly learned to exercise stringent filtering. Anything that deviated from expected threat models often fell prey to disregard. This practice was not negligence, but survival instinct. During times of heightened tension, radar operators could ill afford ambiguity. Their focus concentrated on rapid-moving, high-altitude targets, bombers, missiles, formations of aircraft. Slow, silent objects that hovered annuously were anomalies, not perceived threats. Hence, they eluded attention. The doctrine of NATO also stressed a culture of compartmentalization. Information dissemination adhered to a strict need-to-know basis. A radar operator might identify something peculiar, yet unless it conformed to specific criteria, it would rarely ascend beyond local command levels. Even then, reports would often be subjected to sanitization. Language carried significant weight. Rather than use terms such as unknown object, the reports would specify unidentified radar return or anomalous contact. Such phrases carried diminished significance, eschewing speculation and preferring to close possibilities instead of opening. Discussions. In this milieu, unexplainable sightings quietly accumulated. Each nation curated its own records, limiting the chances for thorough cross-border comparisons. An object transiting from Belgian airspace into Dutch airspace might be logged independently, if it was logged at all. No centralized European system existed to harmonize anomalies across nations. This fragmentation persists in the present. Despite advancements in cooperative engagements, airspace remains under national jurisdiction, with civilian and military frameworks operating somewhat in isolation from one another. Thus, patterns that transcend multiple countries can remain hidden from view. In this context, the role of the Netherlands as a transit corridor crystallizes. Objects crossing Europe, regardless of their origins, would likely traverse through Dutch airspace. Yet, unless they activated red flags or posed tangible threats, they would leave scant evidence behind. This brings forth a disquieting possibility that certain unexplained phenomena went unexamined simply because they lacked the urgency to warrant investigation. During the Cold War, the presence of the unknown was tolerated, provided it remained quiet. Silence was preferable to distraction. The complexities of public disclosure added yet another layer to the situation. NATO nations exercised caution regarding the admission of uncertainty. Acknowledging unidentified entities hovering over sensitive installations could potentially erode public trust or unveil vulnerabilities. It was deemed simpler to attribute such sightings to benign weather patterns or training exercises, or blaming equipment malfunctions. In essence, silence became the prevailing choice. This culture of restraint influenced how incidents like Sustberg were navigated and likewise shaped how subsequent civilian sightings were contextualized. By the closure of the Cold War, certain practices had solidified into habits that became difficult to challenge. Unexplained phenomena were systematically diminished in significance. Genuine curiosity was met with skepticism. Documentation was sparse and fragmented. However, over time, the world underwent a gradual transformation. Advancements in satellite technology led to enhanced coverage. Digital radar systems supplanted outdated analog counterparts, and civilian flight tracking became readily accessible, yet the traditional frameworks persisted. Authorities exhibited a continued reluctance to engage publicly with matters of the unknown. This hesitance endured even as novel anomalies began to surface. Drones, unmanned aerial systems, and electronic warfare tactics introduced layers of complexity into airspace management. The challenge of differentiating between classified military technologies and genuine unexplained events intensified. In this context, ambiguity proliferated rather than dissipated. NATO exercises continued to transpire regularly above and around Dutch airspace. Military aircraft from various nations engaged in training operations together, occasionally employing unfamiliar platforms. To the civilian eye, these exercises may appear enigmatic. For professionals, they constitute routine. Nonetheless, not every unusual occurrence can be ascribed to such training, and no classified operation remains in secrecy indefinitely. Yet, no nation has taken the initiative to assert responsibility for the kinds of aerial objects that appear in Dutch UAP reports. No declassified initiative has unveiled a fleet of soundless triangular crafts, nor has any archival investigation clarified the phenomenon of offshore hovering lights. This conspicuous absence speaks volumes, indicating that at least some encounters do not seamlessly fit established military development trajectories. This does not imply that they are extraterrestrial in origin. Rather, it signifies that they are unaccounted for. For decades, NATO primarily prioritized deterrence over elucidation. The existence of the unknown was acceptable as long as it posed no threat to stability. Now, in the evolving landscape of a post-Cold War world, that calculus is gradually shifting. Governments are beginning to recognize that unexplained phenomena warrant thorough investigation, not due to their potential danger, but because they challenge prevailing assumptions. The recent American newfound transparency has generated ripple effects. European defense analysts have started to reevaluate historical cases. Civilian researchers have revitalized their efforts to probe into archives. In the Netherlands, there is a burgeoning interest in re-examining airspace anomalies from history with a more modern lens. Yet, the pace of progress remains sluggish. Records are far from complete, witnesses are aging, and crucial context has eroded. What we are left with is a fragmented mosaic, some well-documented incidents, numerous obscured ones, and an overarching sense that something traversed Europe's skies during an era of escalating tensions, glimpsed but never fully comprehended. As Amsterdam lies quietly amidst this legacy, its canals mirror the same sky that once bore interceptors and surveillance missions. Its inhabitants exist under an airspace shaped by decades of strategic apprehension. When unexplained objects materialize here, they do so against this rich historical tapestry. They are not isolated anomalies, but reverberations of systems crafted for conflict, of habits cultivated under shroud, and of inquiries postponed for the sake of maintaining order. In the ensuing section, we shall delve into what becomes visible when we observe these reverberations in concert. We will explore patterns, recurrences, geographic distributions, and the possibility that what we are witnessing is not a series of coincidences, but rather indicative of a structured reality. Patterns, recurrence, and the geography of sightings. When individual reports are analyzed in isolation, they often present as inconclusive. A light here, a shape there, a fleeting moment that defies explanation and then dissolves into forgotten memory. Yet, when these occurrences are juxtaposed across years, locations, and witnesses, a subtle emergence begins to unfold. A pattern, not a flamboyant one, not a proclamation, but a quiet consistency materializes. Across the Netherlands, reports tend to follow geographic lines rather than population distribution. Sightings tend to cluster along coastlines, transit pathways, and regions of intricate airspace layering. They frequently manifest near military installations, offshore platforms, and approach routes to significant airports. Their presence leans towards linear spaces, favoring edges over centers. Amsterdam epitomizes this pattern fittingly. It is not an isolated incident, it is integrated within a network. Flights traverse overhead, waterways reflect the heavens, layers of airspace interlace. And when something irregular arises, it often does so momentarily, traversing rather than remaining. This frequency is significant. It implies intention or structure rather than randomness. Not intention in a defined purpose, but movement that adheres to rules, origins, or constraints that have eluded our understanding thus far. The recurrent appearance of black triangles further solidifies this perception. They do not exhibit behaviors characteristic of atmospheric phenomena. They do not drift aimlessly. They do not flicker or scatter unpredictably. They move decisively. They maintain their form. They navigate pathways that correspond with pre-existing human infrastructures, coastlines, transit corridors, borders. This observation does not automatically insinuate technology originating beyond Earth, but it indeed suggests an element of organization. Even unfathomable manifestations of human technology would necessitate coordination, consistency, and recurrent deployment. Traditional atmospheric explanations struggle to account for this coordinated movement across diverse regions and spanning multiple decades. What persists is a category marked by uncertainty, neither an answer nor finality, functioning instead as a placeholder that acknowledges ambiguity without hastily filling the void. Notably, these patterns do not insinuate escalation. There is no uptick in aggression, no interference, nor interaction of significance. The phenomena, whatever their true nature, remain predominantly observational. They glide silently through our awareness, are perceived, yet leave no substantial trace. This restraint emerges as perhaps the most remarkable feature of all. In a world often characterized by upheaval, this unknown presence adopts a conservative demeanor. It refrains from declaring itself. It harbors no urgency for recognition. Instead, it allows itself to fade into obscurity. This provokes a concluding question, not concerning the nature of what is being observed, but rather about the observers themselves. As technology advances, humans increasingly gaze upward. Flight tracking applications, satellites, and ubiquitous connectivity have trained us to anticipate total accountability. Yet, the observed pattern suggests that visibility remains only partial, that some elements linger just beyond comprehension, not intentionally concealed, but rather overlooked. The Netherlands, with its unbroken horizons and complex air traffic, serves as a barometer for this insight. If unexplained occurrences can quietly endure here, time and again, then the certainties we hold elsewhere may similarly be partial. And this acknowledgement does not undermine stability. Instead, it enriches our understanding. Observing the sky in stillness. As dusk descends once again over Amsterdam, the city resumes its well-worn cadence. Lights dim. Water calms. Aircraft etch their trajectories above rooftops and canals. Most evenings, nothing extraordinary occurs. Perhaps therein lies the essence. The narrative of unidentified phenomena above the Netherlands does not unfold as one of invasion or revelation. It instead unfolds as a collection of quiet moments, transient and unresolved. Instances when someone glanced upwards and paused, moments when certainty faltered. These are moments not demanding conviction, merely an audience. Ultimately, this documentary does not request you to reach a conclusion. It invites you to dwell within uncertainty, to acknowledge that even amidst the most scrutinized skies on Earth, there remains much yet to be understood. This mystery calls not for dread, but for patience. The skies of Amsterdam do not proclaim. They murmur, they present fleeting impressions, then recede into silence. Within that silence lies a spaciousness, a space to ponder without haste, a space to question devoid of concern, a space to rest. As you find comfort now, envision the city beneath you. Serene streets, deep water, gentle reflections, and overhead, a sky still holding more than we can articulate. Not menacing, not urgent, simply existing. And come tomorrow, when daylight returns, the inquiries will persist, waiting silently. Your eyes may feel heavy, but if you remain alert, stay with us. A sequence of quiet tales shall now unfold. Each is a concealed encounter worthy of remembrance. Edwards Air Force Base, radar visual 1952. In the parched heat of California's Mojave Desert, the runways and hangars of Edwards Air Force Base were, during 1952, the epicenter of America's experimental flight trials. Here, jet fighters ventured beyond their limits. Rocket planes approached the fringes of space, and the desert skies reverberated with the sounds of engines testing the forefront of aviation. It was a domain of science, discipline, and cutting-edge innovation. Yet, during the late summer of 1952, Edwards became the backdrop for one of the most disconcerting UFO events documented in the Project Blue Book files, a radar visual case that left both technicians and pilots rattled. Initial accounts did not emerge from the civilian populace, but rather from the radar screens within the control center at Edwards. One particularly hot afternoon, operators monitoring the expansive desert airspace detected something anomalous. Returns appeared that were not meant to be there. The blips manifested abruptly, darting at astonishing velocities before pausing and hovering in place. Operators, trained to differentiate between aircraft meteorological phenomena and equipment errors, recognized these targets as solid and authentic. At times, the unidentified objects were seen moving at speeds exceeding 1,000 miles per hour, velocities unmatched by any known jets of the era, before gradually slowing to a standstill over the desert vista. Outside, personnel within the tower and ground observers confirmed the sighting of peculiar lights in the sky, depicted as luminous orbs, silvery white in color. They zipped and maneuvered in manners no conventional aircraft could replicate. At one juncture, 2 lights were reported hovering soundlessly above the runways, shifting positions in harmony as though under intelligent command. News spread rapidly among base staff, drawing more eyes toward the heavens. For Edwards, accustomed to experimental crafts of every conceivable shape and velocity, this was something entirely unprecedented. The Air Force launched interceptors. F-86 Sabres, the pride of the United States jet fleet, roared into the sky in pursuit of the enigmatic objects. Pilots claimed visual contact with luminous entities at high altitudes, radiant points of light that dashed away with remarkable acceleration. Radar tracked both the F-86 and the unidentified objects simultaneously, confirming that something substantial was present. On at least one occasion, a pilot came within gun range of a glowing object before it executed a nearly vertical ascent, leaving the jet far behind. What unsettled the radar operators the most was the manner in which the objects appeared to toy with the interceptors. As the F-86 approached, the UFOs would disperse, accelerate, and vanish from the screens, only to resurface moments later in another area of the sky. When the jets disengaged and returned to base, the radar indicated that the unknowns resumed their positions, hovering over the desert. It was as if the intruders were cognizant of the pursuit and deliberately evaded confrontation. Over several days, sightings persisted. Both radar and visual witnesses reported structured objects executing maneuvers beyond the capabilities of human technology. Some ground observers described disc-like crafts reflecting sunlight, while others recounted brilliant orbs navigating in formation. The consistency of the reports rendered it impossible to dismiss as mere illusions. At one moment, radar tracked a target plummeting rapidly from 40,000 feet to near ground level in mere seconds, an achievement unattainable by any known aircraft. The gravity of the Edwards incidents did not escape the attention of Air Force intelligence. These accounts were not civilian misconstruings of stars or planets. They stemmed from highly trained radar operators, pilots, and technicians functioning within one of the most regulated airspaces in the United States. Edwards represented the pinnacle of America's flight testing advancements, and its personnel were well acquainted with experimental crafts. The inability to identify what they observed amplified the enigma. Project Blue Book files later conveyed the seriousness of the case. Investigators scrutinized radar logs, pilot accounts, and ground testimonials. They examined potential explanations, such as meteorological phenomena, balloons, or classified test flights, but no records indicated any balloon launches. There were also no consistent weather inversions noted over the span of several days, and no experimental aircraft corresponded with the descriptions or performance details provided by witnesses. Faced with this baffling data, the Air Force chose to quietly reclassify the Edwards sightings as unidentified. The significance of the case was magnified by its timing. The summer of 1952 heralded the most substantial surge of UFO sightings in United States history, climaxing with the dramatic radar visual incidents over Washington, D.C. that same July. Although the Edwards occurrences were not as widely recognized, they augmented a growing sentiment within military ranks that something extraordinary was infiltrating American airspace. Privately, analysts concurred that these radar visual reports, where both instruments and human observers corroborated each other's accounts, were among the most challenging to rationalize. The pilots who pursued these unidentifiable objects carried the memories of the incidents long after. These were seasoned aviators pushing the boundaries of jet capabilities, accustomed to the extremes of speed and altitude. Yet, what they encountered at Edwards transcended their extensive training. The brilliant objects darted with a velocity unmatched, attaining heights and executing turns that left them astounded. Equally humbling was the experience for the radar operators. Their sophisticated scopes confirmed the tangible presence of what the pilots and ground crew had reported. Yet, inexplicably, no rationale emerged. In subsequent years, Edwards Air Force Base evolved into a beacon of aerospace advancement, serving as the birthplace for pioneering spaceplanes and stealth technology. However, in 1952, it was a site where the unknown made its chilling presence felt. There were objects devoid of any origin, traversing airspace reserved solely for the most advanced human contraptions. The Air Force's hesitance to publicly acknowledge the incidents, compounded by the discrete classification of the sightings as unidentified, only served to deepen the aura of mystery. Today, the radar visual events at Edwards in 1952 exemplify one of the most pronounced enigmas within military circles regarding UFOs. These were not mere fleeting lights glimpsed by unsuspecting farmers or passing motorists. These incidents were corroborated by radar, pursued by agile jets, and observed by trained personnel at one of the world's foremost testing grounds. For Project Blue Book, they transformed into an enduring conundrum, a clear indication that even within the most meticulously regulated airspace, the mysterious could trespass and then vanish as swiftly as it appeared. Historically, these cases resonate as a landmark episode of the early jet age, when America's finest aviators and cutting-edge radars found themselves eclipsed by something both unrecognized and unexplainable. As the story continued, the Alaska Japanese Airlines Flight 1628 encounter unfolded on November 17, 1986, over Alaska, USA. The vast sky above Alaska that late afternoon seemed endless and devoid of interruption. At an altitude of 35,000 feet, the world beneath transformed into an expanse of white, a frozen wilderness radiating out to the horizon. Inside the cockpit of Japan Airlines Flight 1628, Captain Kenju Taruchi gazed straight ahead through the expansive windscreen, the snow-covered summits of the Alaska Range gradually disappearing behind them. The aircraft, a Boeing 747 cargo plane, was laden with electronic goods making its way from Paris to Tokyo and was now traversing American airspace on its route to Anchorage for refueling. The flight had unfolded as routine. Tarucci, an experienced pilot boasting over 10,000 hours in the sky, felt at ease. The sunlight filtered through thin cloud layers, casting a soft golden hue that danced across the cockpit. His crew, co-pilot Takanori Tamafuji and flight engineer Yoshio Tsukuba, engaged in quiet conversation behind him. Suddenly, the fabric of normalcy was torn. "Captain Tarucci." "Look," Tamafuji urged, directing attention out the left window. Tarucci leaned forward, initially perceiving nothing untoward. Then, against the celestial backdrop, two pale orbs emerged. Glowing with a warm amber hue, they zipped along with unthinkable speed. Unlike any aircraft Tarucci had ever encountered, the objects seemed to glide effortlessly beside the 747, positioned slightly ahead and below. They pulsed with a luminescence, shape-shifting, elongating, and contracting as if they were sentient. Each blink from the captain revealed their agile movement, jerking, transforming, and sliding seamlessly through the air without a hint of turbulence. He reached out to Anchorage Center, relaying, "This is Japan Airlines 1628. We have traffic. 2 unidentified objects moving in proximity with us at our altitude." The voice from Anchorage was composed yet noticeably caught off guard. "Roger, Japan Airlines 1628. No traffic detected in your vicinity. Please repeat." Having seen the objects, he firmly reiterated, 2 objects. Then, with a startling surge, the unidentified entities raced ahead, positioning themselves directly in front of the colossal freighter, just about 500 feet away. A blinding glow flooded the cockpit, so intense that Tarucci instinctively shielded his eyes. The instruments began to flicker, and static danced across the radar screens. Tarucci later conveyed to investigators that the objects presented as dual sets of lights, resembling fire pouring from thrusters. The crew observed in awe as the objects maintained their formation for several poignant minutes, pulsating with energy before vanishing abruptly. Yet the encounter was far from concluded. A short time later, a considerably larger object emerged behind them. This imposing shadow dwarfed the 747 in sheer size. Captain Tarucci likened it to a mothership, describing it as being the dimensions of 2 aircraft carriers stacked atop one another. Unlike its predecessors, this object remained dark and did not emit any light. It loomed solid and oval, akin to a flattened walnut, a formidable silhouette against the dimming sky. At this point, the crew visibly displayed signs of distress. Tarucci sought permission for a course change, requesting Anchorage Center for a deviation of 15 degrees to steer clear of the object. Approval was granted, prompting the 747 to veer from its intended flight path, yet the enigmatic object persisted in following closely. Subsequently, another appeal was made for a descent to flight level 310. Permission was granted once again. As the 747 lowered its altitude, the object maintained its pace. Radar feedback from Eielson Air Force Base and the FAA station in Anchorage validated a second radar return, a solid object closely trailing the path of Flight 1628. At one juncture, the radar texts recorded a primary target in the vicinity of the 747, notably lacking a transponder and displaying no known flight plan. The FAA subsequently confirmed that both military and civilian radar systems registered anomalous readings that corroborated the aircraft's observations. As the aircraft approached the Anchorage airspace, the mysterious object faded from sight. Captain Tarucci executed a safe landing. Although the crew emerged physically unscathed, they were visibly rattled and promptly participated in debriefings with FAA and military officials. This incident might have faded into obscurity, yet another radar echo relegated to secret logs were it not for the actions that unfolded next. Captain Tarucci, unlike many of his peers, chose to speak out publicly. He granted interviews, detailed the encounter, and provided sketches illustrating his sighting. With fluency in English and embodying a respectful and composed demeanor, Tarucci became emblematic of one of the most remarkable UFO incidents in the annals of aviation. He refrained from making claims about extraterrestrial life or indulging wild conjectures. Instead, he straightforwardly recounted the facts, what he and his crew had observed, the readings captured by their instruments, and the radar data that substantiated their claims. In response, the FAA initiated a comprehensive investigation. John Callahan, who was then the chief of FAA Accidents and Investigations, took the lead. He meticulously examined the radar recordings, cockpit voice communications, and the testimonies from the pilots. What he uncovered was unsettling. There were several radar returns originating from a stationary object, an entity without a transponder, devoid of any designated flight path, exhibiting behavior that was inexplicable. Years later, Callahan would comment that it was evident it was not an aircraft. The data was presented to representatives from the CIA, the FBI, and the Air Force. All pertinent agencies were involved. Callahan later received directives to remain silent. According to his sworn testimony, the government classified the encounter, effectively suppressing it, although he took steps to preserve copies of the essential data. In the early 21st century, he disclosed this information to the public and testified at the National Press Club, joining a cohort of aviation specialists who had similarly come forward with their extraordinary experiences. To this day, neither the FAA nor the NOAA provides a definitive explanation for the occurrence. Was it an experimental military craft, an unidentified atmospheric anomaly, a radar malfunction exacerbated by stress? None of these theories accounted for the verifiable facts. 3 experienced aviation professionals witnessed the objects firsthand. FAA and military radar had confirmed the presence of a tangible object. The composure, professionalism, and measured responses of the flight crew suggested the incident's gravity. This was not a case of panic or misperception. It transcended mere misunderstanding. In 1987, amid mounting media scrutiny, the FAA reassigned Captain Tarucci to a desk position, citing concerns regarding his judgment. This decision sparked ire among pilots, unions, and constituents alike, many perceiving it as retribution for his candor. After a few years, Tarucci was reinstated and continued flying until his retirement, unwavering in his account of the event. Over the years, Flight 1628 has solidified its status as a pivotal case in UFO aviation discourse, distinguished not just by its multiple eyewitnesses and radar verification, but also by the rare alignment of acknowledgement from both civilian and military quarters. Very few instances of UFO sightings feature such synchronized corroboration from air crews and radar systems. Even skeptics grapple with this case. It evades the typical avenues of dismissal. There are no references to swamp gas, no Venus masquerading as a phenomenon, no atmospheric irregularities. Just a seasoned pilot, an enormous unknown entity, and a flight that transformed the dialogue surrounding aerial phenomena. What set this case apart was not merely the magnitude of the observation, but its inherent credibility. Kenju Tarucci was not a man chasing fame. He was not prone to fabrications. By all accounts, he epitomized the kind of pilot one would want at the helm during turbulent times, calm, methodical, and focused. And, in his estimation, what he observed that fateful night was not a mere mishap. It was not an error or a misconception. It was genuine. It soared alongside him through the frigid stillness of Alaska, observed and scrutinized, only to vanish without a trace. The Phoenix Lights, Arizona, USA, 1997. On March 13, 1997, just after 8 o'clock in the evening, Mountain Standard Time, residents across Arizona began reporting to law enforcement and television stations. Accounts described a formation of silent lights moving slowly across the nocturnal sky, traversing the span from Henderson, Nevada, to Phoenix and extending southward toward Tucson. The phenomenon commenced in the northwest. Witnesses at the edge of Las Vegas and Henderson observed a massive object adorned with 6 lights gliding southeast at a low altitude. A police dispatcher noted the initial report at 1955 Pacific Standard Time, which was duly logged in the Clark County Sheriff's Department under incident file number 970-13-0147. Moments later, individuals in Kingman and Prescott Valley provided similar descriptions of the same lights. A former pilot conveyed to the Daily Courier that it was not a singular light. It was a solid structure shaped like a V, eclipsing the stars. By 8:17, the object had entered the airspace of the Phoenix metropolitan area, visible from the northwest to the southeast over a distance greater than 250 miles. The Federal Aviation Administration's Southwest Regional Center, located in Albuquerque, received its first formal inquiry at 20:30, when controllers at Phoenix Sky Harbor reported calls coming in from airline pilots inquiring about unidentified traffic below 10,000 feet. The FAA recorded no radar hits within that corridor. Their log entry details that there were no primary or secondary targets detected corresponding to visual reports in the Phoenix area, nor was there any IFR or VFR traffic related. For the ensuing 30 minutes, witnesses throughout the city recounted tales of a colossal triangular or boomerang-shaped object gliding silently overhead. Many estimated its altitude to be at 1,500 feet, while others claimed it was higher than 10,000. Almost universally, observers agreed on the appearance of 5 to 7 intense amber lights, steady without blinking. At 8:37, a family situated in Paradise Valley captured footage of the lights traversing behind Camelback Mountain. The timestamp on the video, 20 hours, 37 minutes, and 18 seconds Mountain Standard Time, aligns perfectly with the hundreds of reports logged that evening by the National UFO Reporting Center situated in Seattle. Director Peter Davenport recorded over 770 distinct reports from Arizona in a span of 48 hours. Among the most intricate accounts came from Dr. Lynn Kaiti, a physician based in Phoenix who had been documenting similar phenomena near South Mountain since 1995. Her footage captured on the 13th of March, 1997, showcased 5 amber orbs arranged in a precise V formation, gliding southward. Both airline and military pilots observed the remarkable phenomenon. Lieutenant Colonel Ed Jones, a pilot with the Arizona Air National Guard, informed investigators that he spotted a line of lights to the west while approaching Sky Harbor. The lights appeared uniform and equidistant, differing notably from flares or standard aircraft navigation lights. Civil radar data from Sky Harbortron and Luke Air Force Base underwent further scrutiny by the EFA-WISE Western Pacific Division. The official log from the Phoenix Tron facility, declassified in 2000 as part of FOIU Case 2000-0006F, indicated the absence of radar correlation, lacking any primary targets congruent with the reported movement, and noted no unusual activities in controlled airspace. At 8:38 p.m., numerous residents situated north of Phoenix observed the object maneuver to the south and vanish over the Sierra Estrella mountain range. Approximately 2 hours later, at 10 p.m., a subsequent event materialized. A line of stationary lights became visible high above the Arelli, capturing the attention of thousands throughout the city. Multiple witnesses, including local television stations KSAZ and KNXV, filmed this second display. Initially, the U.S. Air Force denied conducting any operations in the area. However, 3 months later, Lieutenant Keith Shepard, a spokesperson for Luke Air Force Base, acknowledged that on the night of March 13th, a Thunderbolt II aircraft from the 104th Fighter Squadron of the Maryland Air National Guard was indeed engaging in training exercises at the Barry M. Goldwater Range, located approximately 60 miles southwest of Phoenix as part of Operation Snowbird. He explained that the pilots had released LUU 2B/B illumination flares between 9:30 and 10 p.m. Nevertheless, this explanation only accounted for the second event, the row of illuminated lights hovering over the mountains, leaving the earlier formation observed at 8 p.m. unexplained. Radar data acquired through FOIU from the Western Air Defense Sector, WADS, and NORAD confirmed no tracks indicative of a sizable formation in the skies over Arizona between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. The NORAD communication summary released in 2001 declared that there was no evidence of any trace of unknown aircraft correlating with the reported visual phenomena, no scramble orders issued, and no matching flight plans. Despite the lack of radar documentation, the consistency among eyewitness accounts captured national interest. The Phoenix Police Department, the Arizona Department of Public Safety, and even Governor F. Symington were inundated with hundreds of written accounts. On March 14th, the FAA's Southwest region issued a press release attributing the lights to civil aircraft flying in formation or possibly military exercises. However, no such formation was logged by any flight service or control tower that night. Governor Symington, who had served as an Air Force pilot, initially dismissed the occurrence in a televised press conference, mockingly staging an appearance with a staff member dressed as an extraterrestrial. Yet, a decade later, in 2007, he revised his stance, expressing publicly that the experience was enormous and unfathomable, asserting that he witnessed it personally. He posited that it was neither flares, military in nature, nor any conventional aircraft. The Phoenix Lights incident, therefore, distinctly separates into two verified time frames. The first event, spanning from 8 p.m. to 8:45 p.m., involved a gargantuan V-shaped craft traversing the state, whereas the second event, occurring around 10 p.m., featured stationary lights over the Estrella Mountains. FAA radar archives located in the Albuquerque Air Route Traffic Control Center confirmed the existence of radar gaps beneath 18,000 feet along the Prescott-Phoenix corridor due to the surrounding terrain. This absence of data does not definitively prove or disprove the presence of an object at lower altitudes. Witness accounts from Prescott Valley, documented by the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office, described a solid, silent entity as broad as a few football fields. An off-duty airline captain posited that its wingspan stretched over a mile. Video analyses performed by Dr. Bruce McCabe, a former optical physicist with the U.S. Navy, concluded that the later Estrella light formation recorded at 10 p.m. had indeed descended gradually before extinguishing sequentially, an occurrence consistent with flare drift. However, McCabe asserted that the earlier event visible at 8 p.m. eludes explanation by the flare hypothesis. The Arizona Republic's front page on June 18, 1997, featured a senior FAA official who, speaking under the veil of anonymity, stated unequivocally that there was no doubt something occupied the sky that night, yet they remained uncertain about the nature of it. By mid-1998, over 1,600 witness statements had been filed with the New Fork, the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, and the Center for UFO Studies, QFOS. The testimonies exhibited remarkable consistency, painting a vivid picture of a massive silent triangular craft adorned with 5 lights along its leading edge, gliding leisurely above. The official Air Force case review conducted by Lieutenant Colonel David Evans from Luke AFB Public Affairs concluded that the only aircraft operating near Phoenix during that time frame were indeed A-10s conducting night illumination training at the Goldwater Range. The flares released at approximately 10 p.m. accounted for reports of stationary lights observed to the southwest. No operations took place at or before 8:30 p.m. in the Phoenix or Prescott region. When investigators inquired if radar would have detected substantial objects at reduced elevations, Evans responded that it was possible for a formation beneath 10,000 feet to evade primary radar detection due to the topography. The Federal Aviation Administration's Air Traffic Evaluation Branch clarified that radar tapes from Sky Harbor were overwritten within 15 days as part of their standard procedure, ultimately leaving no recoverable data from the 8 p.m. time frame. By the year 1999, the Black Vault acquired, via the Freedom of Information and the underlying Unidentified Objects Program, the correspondence regarding the incident from March 13 to 14, 1997. including internal memoranda that discussed rising public curiosity concerning unidentified aerial lights and directives to direct all inquiries to the Public Affairs Division situated in Washington, D.C. The case persisted as a point of intrigue within both media outlets and official channels for years following the incident. In 2001, the National Guard Bureau once more validated the 10 o'clock lights as flares released by the 104th Fighter Squadron, all the while emphasizing their lack of knowledge regarding any operations linked to the UFO earlier events. Then, in 2007, a televised acknowledgement from Governor Symington sparked renewed nationwide curiosity. He remarked that it was a craft of unknown origin, asserting it was larger than any object he had ever encountered. The craft's movements were silent, deliberate, and invoked a sense of awe among those who witnessed it. Cross-referencing astronomical data ruled out the presence of Venus, meteors, or navigational lights from aircraft as plausible explanations. Astronomers based at the Lell Observatory in Flagstaff verified that Venus was not visible at the reported altitude or direction that evening at 8:30. Moving forward to 2012, the National Archives FOIU office released a summary detailing exchanges between NORAD, Air Mobility Command, and the FAI Albuquerque Center. These discussions referenced numerous visual accounts of unidentified lights traversing the skies over Arizona and southern Nevada from 8 to 8:45 Mountain Standard Time. The summary specifically noted that no military or civil aircraft could account for the trajectory recorded on radar. As the 20th anniversary of the event approached, the Phoenix Lights file had evolved into one of the most substantial civilian UFO case archives globally. It contains over 10,000 pages of testimonies, radar evidence, FAI documents, and Air Force correspondences preserved across both American and British declassified collections. Despite various analyses, no official investigation has ever managed to conclude what the initial event signified. Two paramount facts remain indisputable. Hundreds of eyewitnesses observed a structured silent formation passing directly over populated areas, while extensive searches revealed no radar signatures, military activities, or astronomical explanations that could clarify the earlier 8 o'clock incident. Archived reports labeled as unidentified aerial lights are retained by the Phoenix Police Department, the Arizona Department of Public Safety, along with the EFAI Southwest Regional Office. March 13, 1997, for the majority, stands as a recollection steeped in quiet wonder. For those who investigate, however, it endures as one of the most definitive mass sightings in contemporary history. Two distinct occurrences, 2 hours apart. Only one has been explained. Phoenix, Arizona, March 13, 1997, witnessed a formation spanning a mile crossing the desert ambiance silently. Radar recordings were non-existent, pilots were observing, cameras were capturing moments, and thousands of witnesses remained with a question that endures without resolution. The Amarillo jet intercept from 1952 showcased another chapter of intrigue. The summer season of 1952 was fraught with turmoil for the United States Air Force, which faced an unprecedented rise in reports of unidentified flying objects across the nation. Daily newspapers featured alarming stories detailing strange lights, radar contacts, and encounters with pilots. Washington, D.C. itself had experienced a spate of sightings in July that prompted interceptors to scramble and radar screens to glow. Against this chaotic backdrop, on July 3, 1952, a tranquil Texas night near Amarillo set the scene for yet another remarkable incident. This would later be filed by Project Blue Book, yet it remained shrouded in ambiguity. The unusual activity began just before midnight when radar operators monitoring the vicinity of Amarillo detected an anomalous return. Initially, it appeared as a standard blip, but its speed and trajectory quickly signaled something extraordinary. The operators observed as the object moved steadily across their screens at velocities far exceeding those of contemporary aircraft. Perplexed by what lay before them, they established contact with local air bases. Within moments, an F-94 Starfire jet interceptor was dispatched to investigate. The pilot, alongside the radar operator, both seasoned veterans in night interceptions, ascended into the night sky under directives to locate the unidentified object. As they reached altitude, ground radar continued tracking the object, guiding the F-94 toward its designated location. Soon, the pilot visually identified it. Against the stark backdrop of the dark Texas sky, a brilliant light hovered, luminous and eerily steady. Initially, they considered whether it could potentially be another aircraft, but its unexpected maneuvers defied such expectations. The object held a motionless position, then suddenly accelerated at a breathtaking pace, altering altitude without the gradual ascent or descent characteristic of human-engineered planes. The F-94 attempted to gain proximity. Each time, as the jet approached, the object would swiftly maneuver away, maintaining a safe distance, never allowing the pilots to close in. The pilots articulated the sensation that the object was aware of their movements, reacting intelligently to their tactical maneuvers. On radar, the blip exhibited sudden shifts in speed and direction, behavior unaligned with any recognized aircraft or meteorological phenomena. At one moment, the F-94 breached the visual range, with the pilot describing the object as an oval-shaped craft emanating a steady white light, void of any visible wings or tail. It produced no noise and left no contrail behind. The crew recounted that their instruments momentarily flickered during their closest approach, though it did not lead to any systems failure. Exasperated, the pilots employed several strategies, swooping from above, climbing from below, and approaching from the sides. Yet, each time, the object effortlessly dodged their attempts, retaining what seemed to be a comfortable buffer zone. Although non-aggressive, it was perpetually elusive. Following nearly 20 minutes of pursuit, the object soared vertically, vanishing into the night sky with a velocity the F-94 could not replicate. Upon returning to base, the crew documented detailed reports. Ground radar operators corroborated their accounts, noting the object's dramatic bursts of speed and instant directional changes. The convergence of radar and visual confirmation provided the case with significant fortitude. Subsequently, Project Blue Book investigators conducted interviews with all those involved, striving to unravel the mystery of that remarkable night. The pilots' testimonies were remarkably coherent and consistent. Radar records validated the existence of an unidentified target. Civilian observers on the ground also recounted seeing unusual lights in the sky near Amarillo around the same time, further reinforcing the evidence. Yet the Air Force encountered a familiar dilemma. The substantiation was compelling, but acknowledging the existence of an unidentified craft proved politically challenging. Amid the heightened tensions of the Cold War, the notion of unidentified objects infringing upon American airspace close to critical military sites posed significant concerns. Should these objects be of Soviet origin, it would suggest a technological edge far beyond what was currently understood. Conversely, if they were not Soviet, the ramifications were even more alarming. The concluding summary from Project Blue Book remained cautious. Internally, the case was categorized as unexplained, while public statements tended to attribute sightings to astronomical phenomena or misidentified aircraft. Analysts suggested the pilots might have confused a bright star or planet, distorted by the atmospheric conditions. However, the interplay of radar tracking, visual confirmation from experienced aviators, and the object's seemingly intelligent evasive maneuvers rendered such explanations implausible. For the pilots involved, the encounter was indelible. They steadfastly asserted for many years that what they witnessed was not only real, but structured and beyond current human technology. Their accounts carried significant professional weight. These were not amateurs caught off guard by celestial bodies or balloons. They were military aviators, trained to recognize and engage airborne threats. The Amarillo interception was part of a broader trend of similar incidents in 1952. Across the United States, military pilots frequently took to the skies in pursuit of unidentified objects, often reaching comparable conclusions. The pattern of radar and visual verification, attempted interceptions, and objects that eluded their pursuers before disappearing at breathtaking speeds characterized these encounters. The Amarillo incident seamlessly matched this narrative, bolstering the impression that something unexplained was traversing the American skies. Civilian researchers later spotlighted the Amarillo case as one of the more compelling radar visual incidents documented by Blue Book. The National Advisory Committee, NAP, included it in their catalogs, underscoring the convergence of multiple sources of data. For skeptics, dismissal became increasingly daunting. While some advocated for atmospheric anomalies as explanations, pilot testimonies and radar logs remained resistant to such reductionist views. The overarching question persisted: why Amarillo? The Texas Panhandle harbored military operations, including routes for bomber and fighter training. The presence of an unidentified object within that airspace did not seem serendipitous. Some researchers speculated that these objects might have been monitoring military exercises, assessing responses, or simply observing from a distance. For the Air Force, the most prudent course of action was to document the incident and swiftly move on. Publicly, they could not concede to the existence of unknown crafts eluding their finest interceptors. Privately, the event was recorded as yet another unknown, contributing to the increasing dossier that Blue Book grappled to elucidate. As time passed, the Amarillo jet intercept stood as a significant illustration of the UFO issue during the 1950s. It highlighted the credibility of military witnesses, the robustness of radar visual cases, and the inadequacy of conventional rationales. Additionally, it mirrored the overarching pattern of Blue Book, wherein robust cases were downplayed, filed away, and left unresolved. For those present, pilots occupying the cockpits, radar operators scrutinizing their monitors, and civilians witnessing from the ground, the night would forever remain unforgettable. They had laid eyes upon something extraordinary, something that perfectly eluded capture and defied coherent explanation. And in the still air over the Texas Panhandle on the 3rd of July, 1952, the Air Force confronted a phenomenon it could not capture, could not rationalize, and could not publicly acknowledge. Fast forward to April 17, 1966, in Portage County, Ohio. A peculiar chase emerged in the early hours that would soon seize national attention and establish itself as one of the preeminent cases recorded in Project Blue Book's legacy. What began as a routine patrol conducted by two deputies from the Portage County Sheriff's Department concluded nearly an hour later with a pursuit of an unidentified object streaking across the nocturnal sky. The occurrence encompassed multiple police officers, was observed by civilians, and even tracked into Pennsylvania. For all those involved, the recollection of that night would remain vivid long afterward, with the explanations proffered by the Air Force failing to quell lingering questions. Initial sightings occurred shortly before 5 a.m. As Deputy Dale Spar and his partner, Wilbur Barney Neff, were investigating an abandoned vehicle along State Route 224 near Ravenna, Ohio. The early morning sky was tranquil, shrouded in darkness, when Spar took notice of a peculiar light emerging from the nearby treetops. Initially, he speculated it might be a helicopter or plane, but it swiftly became evident that he was observing something entirely different. The object was large, illuminated, and disc-shaped, crowned with a glowing dome atop. As the deputies stood entranced, the entity traversed slowly across the tree line, casting an ethereal glow upon the ground. Spar later described it as approximately 40 feet wide, its metallic structure perceptible beneath the radiant light. When it abruptly altered its position and commenced a movement eastward, Spar and Neff climbed into their patrol car to initiate the chase. Thus, the pursuit commenced, the deputies accelerating along the rural lanes. They were astounded to witness the object effortlessly maintain pace with them. Each time they believed they were closing in, the glowing disk would surge forward, hovering just beyond their reach. They reached speeds exceeding 80 miles per hour, the patrol car straining under the continued chase eastward through Portage County. The object maintained a consistent altitude, gliding ahead of the deputies as though guiding their efforts. Upon entering adjacent counties, additional officers joined the fray. Patrolmen in Summit County, followed by colleagues in Columbiana County, spotted the radiant disk and became part of the enthusiastic pursuit. At one juncture, more than 7 police units traversed the winding roads, their illuminated signals flashing against the night backdrop as they endeavored to keep pace with the otherworldly craft. Witnesses offered remarkably similar descriptions of the entity. A sizable metallic disc, aglow with an intense luminescence, topped with a transparent dome that radiated brilliant light, was reported unanimously. Dale Spar, among the most meticulous in his observations, later recounted to reporters that he believed he could discern structural elements, perceiving it as an actual vessel rather than merely a sphere of light. The object exhibited a remarkable capacity to maneuver intelligently, adjusting its speed and altitude dynamically in response to the relentless pursuit. Neff, less inclined to elaborate than his partner, corroborated the main details afterward, but shunned the limelight. In contrast, Spar's willingness to share his account would soon thrust him into the glare of public scrutiny, a decision that would burden him heavily in the years to come. As they crossed into Pennsylvania, the chase stretched nearly 80 miles in total, blazing through Columbiana County and beyond the state lines. Civilians also reported seeing the strange object as it streaked across the sky, and an officer named Frank Panzanella verified the presence of the radiant disk overhead as the pursuit drew to a close. By that time, Spar and Neff's patrol car was perilously close to running out of gas, the deputies themselves feeling both physically worn and emotionally exhausted. The object ascended higher into the night sky, eventually disappearing from sight. While the pursuit reached its conclusion, the ensuing controversy was just beginning. The Air Force swiftly responded, prompting an investigation under Project Blue Book. Major Hector Quintanilla, who headed the program at that time, personally scrutinized the report submitted. In their official statements, the Air Force attributed the deputies' sighting to a combination of the planet Venus and a satellite re-entry. This rationale, however, was met with widespread skepticism. Even in the early morning hours, Venus would not have presented itself as a colossal structured disk crowned with a glowing dome, nor could it have synced its speed with police vehicles crossing multiple counties. Although a satellite re-entry could ostensibly explain a bright object flashing through the sky, it would not account for the protracted controlled maneuvers witnessed that fateful morning. The explanation regarding Venus became a subject of ridicule among both the officers involved and the general public. Spar, fueled by indignation, firmly asserted that what he observed was far from a mere planet, it was a substantial craft. His growing frustration at being dismissed as a flawed observer contributed to a lasting sense of injustice, the echoes of which would follow him for years. In the wake of the incident, Dale Spar faced significant repercussions. In the aftermath of the chase, his story was disseminated by newspapers nationwide, attracting an influx of reporters to Ravenna, who interviewed him and the other deputies. Spar's readiness to recount his experience rendered him not only a figure of public intrigue, but also a target for private derision. Within a matter of weeks, his personal life began to deteriorate. He experienced harassment, saw his marriage unravel, and faced mounting challenges in his career. In subsequent interviews, he lamented that the sighting had effectively dismantled his life. In contrast, Neff, who opted for silence, managed to sidestep much of the fallout, while other officers who corroborated elements of the chase returned to their regular duties. Spar, however, could never entirely evade the shadow cast by that extraordinary night. The Portage County police chase unfolded during a notably active epoch for UFO sightings throughout the United States. Just a year prior, in 1965, the nation experienced a surge of reports, highlighted by the renowned Exeter incident in New Hampshire. Public interest soared, and the media granted extensive coverage to UFO stories. For Project Blue Book, the Ohio chase presented a high-profile case necessitating clarity. However, the Air Force's attempts to attribute the event to Venus and a satellite did very little to allay public concerns. Instead, it emerged as one of the clearest illustrations of what critics denounced as Blue Book's propensity to rationalize even the most compelling reports with bizarre explanations. Even decades later, the Portage County chase endures as one of the most dramatic encounters between police forces and UFOs in American history. Unlike many incidents involving a solitary witness, this event included multiple trained observers, extended across several counties, and even crossed state boundaries. The consistency in descriptions of the object and the well-documented pursuit, combined with extensive media attention, guaranteed that the case would be preserved in the annals of history. For believers, it stands as a quintessential example of the Air Force's refusal to confront the reality of unexplained aerial phenomena. Conversely, skeptics view it as a cautionary tale about how stress, speed, and unusual atmospheric conditions can lead to misinterpretation. Yet, for the officers who drove through the inky darkness that night, pursuing a glowing disk that led them eastward, there remained no doubt whatsoever. They had encountered something undeniably beyond explanation. In reflection, that spring morning in Ohio turned a routine patrol into a chase that would reverberate for decades. The sight of police cruisers flashing their lights as they navigated the countryside, the luminous disk lingering just out of reach, and the overwhelming sense of astonishment and confusion left an indelible mark on the officers who witnessed it. For Dale Spar, the incident marked the onset of a lifelong battle against an inescapable memory. For Project Blue Book, it became yet another incident categorized under explained, though few were convinced by the reasoning offered. And for history, it remains one of the defining UFO encounters of the 1960s, a chase that yielded no capture, a story without resolution, and a mystery that continues to linger along the highways of Ohio. April 24, 1964. Socorro, New Mexico. The late afternoon sun spread gently across the desert as police officer Lonnie Zamora drove eastward from town, attending to a report of speeding. The air was warm, dry, and still, the landscape surrounding Socorro a vast tapestry of sand, brush, and rugged arroyos. The radio remained largely silent. Zamora anticipated nothing beyond a mundane stop before the conclusion of his shift. At approximately 5:45 p.m., an abrupt roar pierced the tranquil atmosphere of the desert. The sound was sharp and unmistakable, far removed from the distant rumble of trucks or the subdued thump of blasting activities from the nearby mine. Simultaneously, a vivid flash of flame erupted to the south, a bright bluish-orange burst suddenly rising above the hills. Assuming it was either a vehicle accident or an explosion, Zamora abandoned the speeding incident and redirected his patrol car toward the source of the light. He navigated a dirt road weaving through gentle rises and patches of scrub. Upon cresting a small hill, he glimpsed something in the distance that he struggled to identify. It appeared to be a white elliptical object poised upon two legs. Initially, he surmised it might be a small aircraft that had met with disaster. The object rested quietly in the arroyo below, thin clouds of dust billowing around it. As Zamora moved closer, scanning the perimeter for any potential victims, he noticed two figures near the object. In his written report, he described them as two diminutive figures clad in white coveralls, positioned near the craft. They seemed taken aback upon noticing the approach of the patrol car. Zamora later documented that the figures were not children, but rather smaller than average adults, moving swiftly as if startled or apprehensive. One figure turned toward the other, displaying an urgent reaction. Zamora halted his vehicle, radioed headquarters, and stepped out to gain a clearer view. The figures vanished behind the object, and for a brief moment, an unsettling silence settled over the desert. Then, a thunderous roar surged through the air. The intensity of the sound resonated within his chest, prompting him to instinctively duck behind his patrol car. He recorded in his report that the noise crescendoed, rapidly rising in pitch and volume. Abruptly, the roar ceased. Zamora cautiously peered up. The object was now lifting off from the ground, ascending slowly on a swirling column of dust. It bore no wings, no windows, and no visible method of propulsion. Its form brought to mind a sleek, smooth, oval capsule. As it ascended, Zamora discerned an insignia on its side, resembling a red inverted V with 3 lines beneath it. In the brilliant afternoon light, the emblem was unmistakable. The craft continued its ascent, tilting slightly before accelerating horizontally. It soared over the Aoyo, passed effortlessly above a line of power poles, and vanished into the sky with a velocity that defied both helicopters and conventional aircraft. Within moments, it had slipped from view toward the southwest. Approaching the site with caution, Zamora pondered whether the figures had fled, or if the ground still harbored residual heat. The desert air carried the acrid scent of something recently scorched. The area bore the marks of charred patches of brush and a depression in the ground where the craft had rested. 4 landing impressions were evident in the earth, arranged in a symmetrical formation around a central charred area. When backup arrived, Zamora guided them through the sequence of events, highlighting the impressions in the scorched foliage. Sergeant Chavez reached the scene first and later noted that Zamora appeared visibly shaken, describing him as pale and shaken. Chavez scrutinized the landing marks and listened attentively to Zamora's account, finding no disparity between the officer's description and the evidence before him. Within an hour, additional officers and local officials congregated at the site. News spread swiftly, prompting representatives from the FBI and Air Force to be notified. Special Agent Arthur Burns of the FBI interviewed Zamora on that very day, meticulously recording his account. Burns observed that Zamora's demeanor was direct and earnest, exhibiting no signs of embellishment or hesitation. The following morning, upon receiving information about the reported landing trace, personnel from Holloman Air Force Base and Kirtland Air Force Base arrived to conduct an investigation. Project Blue Book dispatched Captain Hector Quintanilla's team, accompanied by scientists and technicians from various departments. The Air Force investigators documented the impressions, scorch marks, and surrounding vegetation. They collected soil samples and took measurements. The landing marks appeared sharply defined, indicating a significant downward pressure from a heavy object. The impressions were neither shallow nor scattered, ruling out the possibility of a balloon gondola or lightweight craft. Investigators also confirmed that no helicopter operations had occurred nearby, with the closest scheduled flights involving jets that could not land in such terrain. None had been in the area that afternoon. Blue Book investigators reinterrogated Zamora, searching for inconsistencies, and found none. Zamora reiterated the same sequence of events: the roar, the flame, the figures, the ascending craft, the symbol, and the landing marks. He refrained from attempting to interpret or embellish what he witnessed, maintaining a strictly factual account that described only what was readily observable. He stated that he did not know what it was, only that he knew what he had seen. The Air Force endeavored to correlate the craft with known experimental vehicles, but nothing matched. They explored the notions of hoaxes or misidentifications, yet again, nothing fit. The terrain was remote. No footprints corresponded with the supposed figures. No equipment could be found at the location. There were no tire tracks left by trucks or trailers nearby the scene. The scorch marks and impressions in the ground represented tangible traces that could not have been easily contrived. Investigators also pondered whether the incident could have been the result of a prank from students at the nearby New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology. However, the college president personally assured the Air Force that no experiments or demonstrations were conducted on that particular day. Members of the faculty later corroborated that none of the individuals on campus had access to any equipment capable of generating the effects reported at the landing site. The Air Force also contemplated the scenario of a lunar landing test vehicle or an early vertical takeoff craft. However, none were operational within that region, nor did any produce the kind of quiet ascent followed by rapid departure that Zamora had described. Witness accounts gathered the day after the incident included a family's report of observing an object moving low across the sky at the same time Zamora had encountered the craft. Their statement characterized a luminescent oval object traveling toward the southwest. Additionally, another witness driving toward Socorro recounted seeing a blue flame erupting from behind the hills just moments before the police officers' encounter. Although these testimonies offered little further detail, they aligned with the timeline that Zamora had outlined. The Air Force continued its investigation for several weeks. Soil examinations confirmed that the landing site had experienced intense exposure to heat, yet no evidence suggested combustion resulting from known fuels or accelerants. The scorch marks were dry and pristine, devoid of the residue typically associated with chemical propellants. The impressions left by the landing revealed no disturbance other than downward pressure, signifying that the craft had not dragged, rotated, or shifted during its departure. After weeks of scrutiny, Project Blue Book classified the Socorro incident as an unidentified case. Internal communications from the investigators communicated a definitive consensus. Zamora emerged as a credible witness, the physical evidence was authentic, and the case afforded no conventional explanation. Years later, Captain Quintanilla would reflect on the Socorro incident as one of the most perplexing cases that Project Blue Book had ever encountered. He acknowledged that every attempt to connect the craft to known technologies had been fruitless. The landing traces indicated the weight of a substantial object resting upon the ground. The scorch marks were indeed real, and the witness's reliability remained unquestioned. For Zamora, this experience became a pivotal moment in his professional life, one he never sought to exploit for notoriety. He rejected speculation, turned down sensational interviews, and consistently reiterated the same factual narrative. In each retelling, he underlined the critical details: the roar, the flame, the white oval shape, the figures present, and the distinctive red insignia. He maintained that he had no desire for theories or interpretations. He simply recounted what he had witnessed. The landing site remained evident for an extended period. It took months for the vegetation to recover in the scorched areas. The impressions gradually eroded under the effects of wind and time, yet they were thoroughly documented in photographs and diagrams. This incident would go on to be one of the most rigorously investigated UFO cases in American history. Today, the Socorro case endures as a rare instance of a sighting bolstered by physical evidence, extensive investigations, and the testimony of a respected police officer. It embodies none of the ambiguity often found in many other encounters. There was a craft. It landed. It left traces behind on the earth. It ascended without generating noise or displaying visible mechanical propulsion. In the New Mexico sky, it disappeared, leaving behind charred brush and for steadfast impressions that remained a mystery for investigators. On the late afternoon of April 24, 1964, a tranquil desert landscape transformed to host one of the most persistent enigmas recorded in the Project Blue Book archive. Officer Zamora had responded to what he believed to be an accident or an explosion. Instead, he encountered something that rose seamlessly from the ground, glided across the hills, and vanished beyond the desert ridges. The traces linger on in the records, preserved as undeniable evidence of an event that continues to elude classification. The Kenneth Arnold sighting, 1947, Mount Rainier, Washington. On the afternoon of June 24, 1947, a serene summer day enveloping the Pacific Northwest, Private pilot Kenneth Arnold peered out from the cockpit of his small Call Air A-2 monoplane and witnessed something that would forever alter the lexicon of the modern era. 9 bright metallic objects soared in an unusual skipping formation across the snow-capped contours of Mount Rainier at speeds that no aircraft on Earth could match. In the weeks that followed, the term flying saucer would emerge, capturing the attention of the Air Force and setting the stage for the understated inception of Project Blue Book. It was the sighting that ignited it all. Arnold, a respected businessman and seasoned pilot from Boise, Idaho, was flying solo that afternoon from Chehalis to Yakima, Washington, conducting a search for a missing U.S. Marine Corps transport aircraft that had fallen somewhere in the Cascade Mountains. The sky was clear, visibility impeccable, and the air smooth, perfect conditions for aerial searching. At an altitude of 9,200 feet just north of Mount Rainier, Arnold caught a sudden glimmer of reflected light to his left. Turning his head, he beheld a string of brilliant disc-like objects hurtling swiftly across the mountains. Their movements were unlike anything he had ever encountered. They appeared to weave or skip as they soared, tilting intermittently to capture the sunlight like polished mirrors. At first, Arnold thought they might be experimental aircraft, but as he measured their flight time between two distant peaks, he concluded their speed was far beyond known capabilities, nearly 1,700 miles per hour by his estimation. This was 1947, a full year before the sound barrier had even been officially breached. The description Arnold provided depicted the objects as flat, circular, and thin, each reflecting light with the brilliance of a mirror catching the sun. They were arranged in a diagonal formation, one object leading while the others trailed behind in a disordered chain. He estimated their size to be approximately that of a large bomber, around 100 feet in diameter. In his detailed written report, Arnold accentuated the peculiar motion of the objects over their shape. They glided through the air like a saucer would if it were skimmed across water. Later that day, he conveyed this description to reporters, noting that it was the motion rather than the appearance that would ignite the famous term flying saucer, triggering a media frenzy. Upon landing in Yakima, Arnold promptly relayed his sighting to the airport manager, who verified that no aircraft were operating in that vicinity at the time. The very next morning, his account was published in the East Oregonian newspaper and rapidly caught the attention of the Associated Press. Within 2 days, headlines nationwide blared, "Boise pilot reports seeing 9 flying saucers over Mount Rainier." The phrase captivated a public still grappling with the advent of jet engines, rocketry, and atomic energy, propelling flying saucers into the American lexicon as if they had always belonged there. The inquiry commenced. The United States Army Air Forces regarded the report with due seriousness. Intelligence officers from Hamilton Field in California and McCord Field near Tacoma conducted thorough interviews with Arnold. They found him composed, rational, and consistent, with his background as a pilot and businessman, lending significant credibility to his narrative. While radar installations in the area showed no unusual returns that day, several other pilots and ground witnesses across Washington and Oregon reported observing similar luminous disks at nearly the same moment, indicating that the phenomenon was indeed widespread. The initial report from the Air Force stated that the objects were not balloons, birds, or any conventional aircraft. Yet, lacking any physical evidence or photographs, the case remained unsettled. Scientific scrutiny followed, as physicists and aeronautical engineers meticulously analyzed Arnold's account. Some posited that he might have miscalculated the distance to distant planes or suggested that reflections from his cockpit windows had created an optical illusion. Nonetheless, Arnold stood firmly by his observations, meticulously timing the formation's passage from Mount Rainier to Mount Adams, a known span of 50 miles, clocking their speed at roughly 1,700 miles per hour. At that time, the fastest known aircraft, the Bell X-1 rocket plane, could only reach such velocities under restricted test